We're streaming.
Good morning and welcome to the June 16th, 2020 School Board Work Session. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of our board members and staff for accommodating our change in schedule today. We have graduation this evening, and so we are holding our meetings earlier in the day so that our staff can be appropriately at our graduation this afternoon. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for being so kind and accommodating our change in schedule for today. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Superintendent Byrd as she walks us through our work session today. Mrs. Byrd?
Thank you and good morning to everyone. The first item you have before you is going to be a new 2020 MSAP grant. This grant that you're going to hear Ms. Bridges is graciously come back to walk us through this grant. There's a grant that the deadline was extended to June 30th. The grant proposal is for $15 million. And looking towards the grant, we want to make sure, one, we stabilize some of the programs we have, while also looking at schools that did not have an attractor in their schools and trying to provide some assistance when it comes to looking at the area and building in an attractor for certain schools. So Ms. Bridges, I believe she's on. She's going to walk us through this. And if the board approves this will go back to back, as there is a hard deadline to submit to June 30th. So I'm going to now turn it over to Ms. Bridges. Thank you.
Good morning, and thanks for the opportunity to come back. It's a little surprising after retiring to be back at the very first board meeting after that retirement. I did want to clarify, just for the record, that I am not here in my former position. I am here as an independent consultant with Inspire Solutions. Many of you know Vicki Mace, so I'll be doing some consulting work with Vicki through this process. The other thing I wanted to let you know is, should you stop by the office at some point in time, you will find a book on desegregation that was purchased out of Magnet Funds that we just think is a really good read and a really good summary of where we started a long time ago with Brown versus desegregation to where we are now, and also how we can move forward. So one of the ways that we believe we can move forward is by applying for this $15 million grant. I did want to let you know that it is competitive. We are a long way from getting $15 million, but this is the process by which we can move forward if we choose to do so. As the superintendent mentioned, the grant is due June 30th. So we are in the process of completing that project. We have identified the 4 schools that we wish to include in the project for various reasons. And those schools will, so the grant is primarily about desegregation, but certainly we look for an academic lift as well when we look at these schools. So we looked at Tenorock and we worked with the superintendent, the area assistant superintendents, and the school principals. And we looked at Tenorock because of the number of seats that are vacant at that school. Many of you were here when we did the rezoning, and there were some decisions to pull some neighborhoods out of that rezoning process. And so we were left with vacant seats at Tenorock. So our hope is to add a total, over the 5 years, a total of 500 students to Tenorock, rolling some of those students up through a combined Cumbie and Blake process, where Cumbie and Blake would have the elementary Cambridge program, Blake would have the middle school program. Cumbie students could continue to choose to attend Crystal Lake, which is their option now, other than their zone school, or they could choose to be part of the middle school program at Blake. Then those 8th graders at Blake would roll into the high school program at Tenorock if they chose to do so, giving us a seamless K-12 Cambridge program on this side of the county. We already have the Winter Haven Cambridge program. This would then allow for an alternate for the students in this area. It would also, we believe, really strengthen the academics at Tenoroc. And of course, the program would be open to any zone Tenoroc students as well. So when we talk about 500 students that are new to Tenoroc, the entire staff at Tenoroc has the option to be trained in Cambridge. Tenoroc can elect to offer Cambridge classes on a far wider offering than just the 500 seats that are new seats, as well as the 100 seats set aside. One of the reasons we looked at Cambridge is because you don't have to complete the whole program. In other words, for those students who come to Tenoroc and have a real strength in English or social studies, they can gain college credit by taking just those Cambridge classes. If they wish to pursue a Cambridge diploma, that is certainly an option for them as well. Many of the Cumbie kids would be going to Tenoroc anyway. That would be their traditional zoned high school. And so by creating a strong elementary and middle school program, we believe that we can up the academic performance of all of those students, get them ready for a competitive high school program, and give them options in post-secondary that are not just college options. There will be a fabrication lab that's created there that will meld nicely with the other academies that are available. And again, while those kinds of options are available to the magnet school students that would be there, it would also be open to all of the students at Tenoroc. Another significant difference from some of our other programs is there would be no academic screening for these high school students. Magnet schools are not permitted to have academic screening. So the Cambridge program would include those students that roll up, but any other student who is selected by random lottery. So it would really open the doors wide for any student that had that aptitude and interest to be included in the program. The other school that's included is Bartow Elementary. As you know, we have an IB seamless K-12 program in 3 of our 4 magnet areas. We've got elementary programs at Brigham, Dundee L, and at Lincoln. Bartow Elementary would be the final piece that would feed into Union, and then the students would, have the option to select to go to Bartow IB. So those are the 4 schools. The grant is still being written, but we will give you a final copy when it is done. And then any positions in the grant, should we be awarded the grant, will come back to the board at that point in time for final approval. So that's sort of a quick snapshot. And I know we sent you sort of a 5-page overview, but if there are questions, I'm happy to try to answer them.
Are there any questions? Ms. Miller?
Thank you. And I appreciate Carolyn being here. I think you're an expert in the field. And so I appreciate what you're doing to help us here. I want to address a couple of things because 2 of these are my schools in my district. I don't know that there was surveying done for this for families and staff, and I don't know that we covered that when we talked. But this is a program that will benefit a few. The issue we have at Code Academy is Crystal Lake is not panning out as it was designed to do. And that's a separate conversation that I want to have after we talk about this. And so we're losing kids at Code. They're leaving to go to Winston to roll into Lawton Childs. And so the parents and families want an option for the higher performing students or the parent engagement there to do this. I have several issues with this. I don't want to deny these children an opportunity, especially to excel with Cambridge. The fact that there's no academic requirement, I would like to see the program a little more in detail of what that would provide. But to take the higher performing kids out of Code and send them to Blake when the other school, when Crystal Lake is half the distance, I think we need to talk about what happened to the $10 million that went into Crystal Lake and why that engineering program isn't performing as it was designed. I know this isn't our local dollars, it's federal dollars, but I'm still concerned with the tax dollars spent and what the chain of command is in enforcing or having principals continue programs that were invested high amount of dollars into. But the concern sending kids to Blake and then pushing them all the way back to Tinnerock was designed, and I wasn't here at the time for that land deal, and I wasn't here for the time of that zoning that put us kind of in this situation of an under-enrolled school where almost half of their ninth graders have repeated. This is it's a tough seat. And I know at the beginning of Winter Rock, just the meetings I attended, it was designed to be academies, wall-to-wall academies in a technical type setting, not technical where hands-on, where there wasn't academic settings with or programs, but it was going to highly technical based academies to meet the needs of that community. The first time college students or the students from low socioeconomic areas to really break that cycle of poverty. We haven't been able to do that. So I want to talk about the majority of the students of Tinnerock, because the majority of the students will not be in this Cambridge program. And I don't know that even 500 over this amount of time will help with the low enrollment there. So we're kind of in two situations. We're offering a really great program for a few. We're going to spend a lot of money in transportation after we just had a big conversation about how in debt we are in transportation. There's a lot into this. So my biggest question was, could we have known about this earlier? Because I see that it's on the regular agenda to be voted on. And this is something that we needed more time. We needed more time to delve into this, to give us this and vote on it today. I'm not ready to do that. So my two questions, I think, are, what are we going to do for the majority of the kids at Tinnerock? And for the Crystal Lake kids who we invested $10 million in, but right now have no engineering teacher, no aquaponics teachers left, the AP math teacher is not there. And really most of that program is not functioning as it was designed. And Blake Academy had great leadership that had a program for music starting in 3rd grade. They had a looping program at one time where you could loop up in middle school so they could help social emotional with the students, meet those needs, and a leadership program. And that's no longer implemented like it was designed. So I have a hard time voting for $15 million on another program until we can talk about what's in place to make sure these programs are carried through, no matter what the site-based leadership changing or whatever the issues are. Because if we put $15 million in this, and then 5 years from now, the public's going to want to know, if it's still working and what we're doing. And I can't give them that assurance at this point. So there's a lot of barriers here. And I think the board, I'm sure, has other questions. The biggest thing I'd like to know is, how are we going to make up the transportation dollars? And what are we going to do for the majority of the kids at Tinnerock who are not going to be in this Cambridge program?
If I could address just a couple of points, because the question that you raised is a great one about why are we just getting this now? The way the federal grant programs work for competitive grants is they drop and we are given 40 days to write the program. And so in working with the schools and developing the program, we are just now at a point, as I said, the grant is not completed. We are still working on it. And so while we have general conversations about if a grant should drop, until a grant drops, we can't bring anything to you. And unfortunately, this is that timeline that federal competitive grants operate under. It is less than ideal, but it is what we are left with if we wish to compete. With regard to the programs themselves, I would like to mention that in past grants, we have taken schools such as Dundee L, Dundee Ridge, Winston, schools that have struggled, that have been under capacity. Most recently, we worked with Polytech in this grant that we are currently in, and we have managed to not only fill those schools, but see some pretty significant academic gains. Crystal Lake was never designed as a full magnet school. It was a school within a school. Their aquaculture program is there, their robotics program. So the equipment that was purchased is still there and is still in use. Is it used to its fullest capacity? That would be something that I would defer to others to make determinations on. That we did make some changes at Crystal Lake with a with a recent superintendent and some decisions on how to operate that school within a school. One of the advantages I see in this particular magnet school grant, all of our past grants have been 3-year grants. This is a 5-year grant with a 6-year rollover possibility. So there are significant funds that allow us to implement the program over a longer period of time and make sure that it is actually incorporated in the culture of the school, which is what we've seen at many of our new magnets at Winston, at Dundee L, at Polytech, at Dundee Ridge. So I do have confidence that if the school is committed to the program and the funds are there, that we can implement a very strong program. And every principal we've talked to has been very committed to the concept of the program and using it to reach all of the students at their school.
Mr.
Can
Hill?
someone address, there was $10 million put into Crystal Lake for the case, a school within a school. It does not operate like it was designed. Is there someone that can address the site-based management of these grants? Once they're implemented 3 years later, they're not operating. 5 years later, they're not operating like they were designed to operate. And Blake, the programs that were there, and I know everyone has their different styles and we've moved things around, but I'm talking from the taxpayer's point of view. There's a lot of money spent on programs, and you're right, Dundee has done great. There are some stars on some of these programs. So I think the conversation needs to be, why are we seeing that in certain areas and then not in other areas? And someone needs to address the transportation cost of this and what the goal is for the majority of Tenor Rock students, which will not be in the Cambridge program.
So again, let me just talk to you a little bit about the transportation costs. We're currently transporting all of these students. The Cumbie students are part of the magnet school. The Blake students are part of the magnet school. Students have the opportunity to come from all over Lakeland and choose the magnet school that they wish to attend. The same thing is true for Bartow Academy. When we talk about Blake students going to Tenor Rock, much like our academies, we would have to look at what sort of transportation we wish to provide. At high school, we generally do not provide transportation for academies. So we would have to make that determination. If in fact a determination is made that Blake students would be transported to Tenor Rock, I'm hopeful that we could do a hub and wheel so that the students gather centrally at Blake and then are transported. But that's something that we would have to take a look at and make a determination on.
Yeah, because how could we not offer transportation if we've sent these kids from Code to Blake in a Cambridge program and then pulled the rug out that I can't transport you to Tenor Rock, which is 10 to 15 miles, depending on which way you go, away from the Blake area. So this is a lot that I wish we could have had a work session on the idea of this. I understand the grant couldn't be proposed, but there could have been discussion on the idea of all of this so we could work it out instead of pushing for a vote today. Is there anyone else that, that's not your, I know that's not your part on implementation and accountability, but is there someone else that can speak to that on these other programs?
Am I on? Can you hear me? Okay. Good morning, Ms. Miller.
Hi.
As was stated, those are some excellent questions and valid questions. Like to go back and talk about Crystal Lake Middle for a moment. Obviously, there was transition, and there has been transition. And when you look at school leadership, school-based leadership, building some continuity, coming in and picking up a program or continuing a program, that transition piece is extremely important. One of the things that I would like us to keep in mind is that the story isn't completed at Crystal Lake Middle. That's the good news. Yes, there have been challenges. Yes, there has been some transition, but I've had time to look into it a little bit. I still have some more research to do, but the indication is that it is unique and that it is not a complete total magnet program. It is a school within a school dynamic magnet. And the principal has worked to pull the school together and build some continuity as one school so there isn't divisiveness in the school within the school concept. With that, though, my understanding is that they have been able to stabilize the programs. The programs are viable, and so they're building and moving forward. And in the little bit of research I was able to do, they're also filling those seats. So I think to your question, yes, there are unique challenges and situations that occur in every area, and yes, we need to make sure that we are providing the guidance and supporting our leaders in those situations, and continue to work toward improving those programs. So there is still hope, and I'm talking about a confident expectation, not wishful thinking, that we will continue to build on the Crystal Lake piece. In regards to the transportation, as Ms. Bridges said, I'm a novice in that area, so I will let Ms. Bridges and Mr. Davis work through those pieces. In regards to Tenor Rock, you know, your concern is valid. You want to make sure all students have opportunities. I think one of the things that I always appreciated as a principal is having multiple programs and opportunities at every school, because you have students that are on that spectrum across your schools that need various, they have different needs, a variety of needs. And so then the wonderful thing, like a strong AP program or an IB program or a Cambridge program, is, especially with the way this grant is written, it does give students access to a rigorous and challenging curriculum and learning opportunity. I think we still have to continue to build our other programs, whether it be our, you know, the workforce side of the equation with our career academies, continue to build those, continue to work and improve the academics for our emerging scholars, which would feed into a Cambridge, excuse me, and you know, continue to work that. And I believe they are moving in the right direction. There's been a lot of work done there the last couple of years to really improve the academic environment of the school. So
I just need to know who is responsible. We have site-based management. We have a school within a school now going into Tenor Rock that will hire a completely new AP just to run the Cambridge program. Who is responsible for making sure? Is it regionals? Who is responsible? So when 5 years from now, when somebody asks me about a $15 million investment, I can say, oh, well, I can go back and track how they kept up with the program, because Crystal Lake is struggling. And the Blake programs are not, the music and all of the things that were there are not there. And I'm sure it was for a good reason, and there was a different interest, and they took a different direction. We're talking about tax dollars and a huge investment. So I just need to know who in the chain of command is accountable for these programs maintaining. And I want to mention, I feel like we're doing surgery and rerouting arteries of really high functioning kids to push grades. And that is not, and I know that's because that's the push from the DOE. Tenor Rock suffers, and a lot of it is because of the zone that was allowed to go there. They need help. There's all kinds of supports that could be in place. But as legislators do, and as the Department of Education likes to remind me, when they make policy, they make it for the masses, not the few. And at Tenor Rock, we need to look at the masses, what the masses need, and meet those needs. Whether it's additional academies for technology or additional, when I'm talking about, you know, academies, hands-on academies, it's not just driving forklifts. We need kids to know how to do inventory for all these warehouses that are going up on I-4, all the technology, that kind of technology-based instruction, similar to the very successful academy there, like the Power Academy, similar ways to give kids opportunity, not to walk them to the door of graduation, but really long-term, self-sustaining, gainful employment. And I just don't see that concentration. I see, again, we're pushing higher academic kids to that school because the grades are hurting there. So that's my concern as an advocate for for the underdog, the kids who need the most support. That's my concern. So who will hold these schools accountable? Because we're doing a school within a school. So who is going to be the lead on that?
So you know, the way we're structured, obviously the superintendent will hold me accountable and the regionals accountable to make sure that we implement these programs effectively and that we provide them the support and the guidance that they need. So That's where the accountability piece will come in. And certainly we applaud and we all want every child to succeed. And so the philosophy is if you do the right things in a school, grades will take care of themselves. So we're not focused on trying to maneuver and game something. What we're focused on is trying to give every student, like you said, an opportunity to succeed. So whether it be to get the gainful employment, you want students to be able to make a living wage. So we want those opportunities for them. And that's why you need multiple programs on a high school campus so that you are able to meet the needs of all students.
Thank you, Miss Hill. Thank you, Mr. Hill. One
Yes,
of the things I want to be very clear, this is not about grades. This is about an attractor for that school to actually try to build a feeder pattern to build capacity in that building so we can get them up. This is not about school grades, but it's about building a feeder pattern for them. The discussion with Tenor Rock has been a long discussion about how do we fill the seats at Tenor Rock. This has been years of a discussion. No, I was not here when Tenor Rock was built and all of that happened, but I do know there's been an ongoing discussion about that. That has not been about school grades. So this is a feeder pattern that's being built. The timing, as Ms. Bridges shared with you, is not a timing that we all expect, but when these grants drop like this is how they drop from the federal level. We wanted to make sure we had the time. If we would have had additional time, we would have workshopped this. So I just want to be clear, it's not about a school grade, a feeder pattern. When it comes to transportation, it's easier to do a hub with high school students, and that's all a part of when we do that. A lot of these children are already being routed to these schools right now currently, and we'll do a hub going over to the high school for them with that. So I want to clear up some of those things. And when it comes to any type school, once you take the seats in the school as a building principal, that's who's responsible. It rolls up to the regional and then to the deputy and then to the superintendent. That's the area of responsibility when it comes to operation of a school building. So I want to make sure I address those. I know we got questions coming in, Ms. Fortney.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I just want to thank Mr. Hill for speaking today, and I don't want to deny these kids the opportunity from code. So I want to hear from the other board members, but there are grave concerns about $15 million. Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Fortney is up next.
Good morning, everybody. First, congratulations to Ms. Bridges. well earned. I too have some transportation questions, but I appreciate your comments, Superintendent Byrd. I'm more concerned about the kids that aren't going to get in there and the 1 hour one-way bus rides to move them to the other schools. I just wanted to put that out there. Also, very, very pleased that BEA finally is getting the IB, because I never understood why we didn't have that there for that smooth transition in Bartow, and I think that's a prime candidate for that. My big concern is the training for this grant. Where will that be? Will that be over at Tradewinds or whatever that place is on the coast that everybody goes to? And who's going to be doing the training? Can we do that in-house? And how are we going to find folks to apply for those positions as far as teachers? We're having a hard time.
If it's all right, Mrs. Byrd, I'll go ahead and try to answer some of that. So in the grant, all of the training costs are incorporated into the grant. The training is done on a national level by certified Cambridge trainers. Some of the training is very close by. It may be as close by as Hillsborough or Pinellas County. Usually it's done at a high school site with teachers going to the various sessions during the summer. Some of the training will be local training, but the vast majority to get everyone started, much like International Baccalaureate training, is done by the professionals to make sure that you've got a really clear message and very consistent implementation of the program. The program is designed so that at Tenor Rock by year 4, it will be self-sustaining. So there won't be a continued financial investment for the cost of the training or the materials. In other words, as students pass their Cambridge tests, There are dollars that flow through from the state of Florida that reimburse, that some of the money goes to the school, which allows them to continue to pay for personnel and for continued testing and training. Some of it flows to the district, which allows us to market those programs and continue to ensure the viability of the program. In terms of hiring teachers, first of all, I'll be the first one to acknowledge that that is a challenge. Cambridge is a very well thought of program around the state and around the nation. And so we tend to get quite a bit of buy-in for teachers that are interested and want to make that commitment to do the training. So I do believe that we can recruit teachers. The other thing that we will do is we will train any Tenoroc teacher who wishes to become a Cambridge teacher. That will be a part of the grant. So I think that that improves and lifts the expectations for every teacher, whether you're teaching a Cambridge class or whether you're just implementing some of the successful Cambridge models into your existing classes. And that's one of the goals of this grant. The other piece is that we do have a fabrication lab, which will also be part of that grant. And as I mentioned, that will be open to every student at Tenoroc. The idea being, for example, the code students have already been working, big surprise with the name, on coding and technical skills. We're talking about stacking credentials, micro-credentials for students, so that even while they're in high school, they're getting these certifications, which makes them more marketable, whether that's to help offset the cost of college and they're taking advantage of post-secondary options, or they're looking to go to work immediately. And if you have several credentials in Microsoft suites and in coding and in those pieces, it just makes them more marketable. And certainly they can still take advantage of academy classes as well.
Thank you, Mrs. Bridges.
Sure.
Thank you. We have a question coming in from Ms. Reynolds next.
Oh, I cannot tell you how excited I am that there will be another Cambridge in Polk County, because it has been a huge benefit to the Winter Haven area. I know a couple of questions came up about busing. This came up in Winter Haven 3 years ago, I want to say. It was right after I came on the board. And I believe we were able to bus some additional students based on the Cambridge funds that Ms. Bridges just spoke of. That they do receive money for each student that's testing and as they're successful in their tests. So that's how they were able to bus some additional students to Winter Haven. But Winter Haven Cambridge is busting at the seams. They have more issues with having to turn kids away that could probably qualify because there just aren't enough seats. I think over the past 10 years, the Cambridge program being implemented has shown that it's been a huge attractor for Winter Haven High School. If you look 10 years ago in the Winter Haven area where kids were choosing to go to school, more and more were driven towards Lake Region. And since Cambridge was implemented, that has definitely flipped. So I think as far as getting it to fill some additional seats in the Tenoroc area, that this will be an incredible program. I was very excited to see it in the grant. And I think Tenoroc's a great location to be able to reach some of those Lakeland kids and west side of the county kids. Additionally, I know obviously we want to have things for all students, but I don't think we can ever say don't apply for a grant because it's not good for every kid, because I don't know that anything we do in this county will be the perfect solution for every kid, because all of our students are individuals and they all need something different. I'm a little bit jealous, Carolyn, that you get 40 days to apply for federal grants, because the ones I've applied for in the past month have been about 2-week turnarounds. So the fact that you get 40 days I'm a little bit envious. But I greatly appreciate all of your work on this, especially as you're out the door. So thank you for finding this grant and making sure that we apply for it. I definitely will be supporting it. And I thank you for the innovative solutions to get some of our students not only more opportunities, but also to make sure that they're spread throughout the county.
Thank you. We have a next question coming in from Mr. Townsend.
Yeah, I have a few questions. So what is the timeline? So if we approve the app, we're being asked to vote on moving forward with the application, correct?
Right. At this point in time, it is a concept. The grant will be submitted June 30th. And then should we be awarded the grant sometime at the end of September, it would come back to you with the details in terms of the personnel, and you'd be able to review the whole project and ask any questions at that point in time.
Okay, and we would have to vote again to approve acceptance. Is that
Yes,
correct? Okay.
that is correct.
So we're not obligating ourselves today. All we're doing is giving you the authorization to move forward with the grant. Is that's
That is
correct? Okay. Couple of questions. So why is Blake the choice and not Crystal Lake for this?
So Blake has never been a part of our magnet school grants in the past. It is not considered a magnet school. It seems like a small parsing of the language, but as a magnet school, all of those seats are considered new seats under the magnet school grant. We could not include Crystal Lake as a new magnet. They would come in as a revised magnet, and we have to have a higher percentage of seats in new magnet seats than we do in revised magnet seats. So when you look at the total number of students at Blake at 795 plus the 600 at Tenorock, that offsets the students at Code and Bartow Academy so that we can include all four. The other piece of that is that a school, that we can't just randomly select a school. Federal guidelines say there has to be some sort of a DSEG piece that needs to be addressed in order for a school to qualify. That is socioeconomics as well as looking at race, ELL, ESE. And so when we look at the schools, Blake was one that met those qualifications.
And I'm curious, in what way, based on
Both in their socioeconomics and in their diversity.
what's the off the top of your head? What's the enrollment breakdown for Blake?
At the moment, Blake has the capacity for about 795 students. Right now, they're enrolling at about 640. So.
And what's the racial breakdown there? Or do you know that off the top of your head?
I'm sorry, I do not. I'll be happy to look that up and send that to you.
Okay. So to Ms. Miller's point about the school within a school at Crystal Lake, and this is going to be the same deal at Tenorock. I personally experienced Crystal Lake with my son in 8th grade 2 or 3 years ago, and he was not a participant in any of the special programs. He was part of the general ed program and had a very good experience there. I thought the general ed quality was quite good. So I just wanted to, Mrs. Miller had talked about the school struggling. I just want to make sure. I think there's two different issues there. There's general ed, and then there's what we're doing with the special programs. And I am concerned that we're just allowing the special programs to wither. But I don't think that's necessarily reflective of the whole school. And these are things that this kind of back and forth balance is difficult and important to discuss, which is why we need to be work sessioning this. My larger concern is the site-based leadership at Tenorock. I have absolutely no confidence whatsoever that the principal there will not squander this investment. At the roundtable we had last summer, which most of us attended, one of the leading science teachers at that school talked about leaving that school and being snapped up by Kathleen because of the difference in the quality of leadership because of a lot of things. There was a lot of talk. A lot of us were talking about how do we get more advanced science, more advanced classes into that school, and there was a lot of pushback against that, in the sense that they were essentially unnecessary because we were already doing things that were dual enrollment or whatever. I think for the record, it's important for the public to know the principal at Tenorock has twice been credibly accused sexual harassment. Twice investigated thoroughly. I've read both of them, cover to cover. The allegations were unable to be proved or unproved. Since then, I'm sorry, and this institution has shown itself completely unwilling or unable to hold him accountable. We had a sitting school board member who went and intervened in that investigation of him, several years ago. Since then, a football coach has been arrested on drug charges. Some of the strongest minded academic teachers there have been essentially run off. I just don't have any confidence that a Cambridge program there under that leadership will succeed. I want to invest a massive amount of money in Rock. Like that's, those kids deserve it more than anybody else does. I'm inclined to vote today to let the grant go forward. But I've got a lot of concerns, starting primarily with site-based leadership at Rock, that may prevent me from voting to support it when it comes back to us. I am concerned also. So after 5 years, like what's sustained? I mean, do we reapply for it? Does it? What I mean, I know there's the 6th year. Is this a thing that will be sustaining, or do we have to sort of pick up the extra costs out of whatever we're going to have then?
So at Rock, the sustainability comes from the Cambridge testing and the dollars that are generated by that process. Just like at Cambridge and Winter Haven, the dollars that are generated through testing offset the cost of the program itself. So the training of new teachers, the materials, the testing, all of that does not fall back to the district. It falls to the resources that are generated by the Cambridge program itself. So it is a self-perpetuating program.
Okay. So the majority of this funding then is essentially implementation / training funding / it's not sustenance over time. Like it's not like the bulk of the cost of all of these programs are going to be paid through normal personnel costs, the same way we would like with a teacher, right?
Yeah, there aren't additional personnel costs that extend beyond the period of the grant. So during the period of the grant, we put, in the case of Rock, we pay for an assistant principal and a secretary. In the case of Blake, we put 2 TRSTs. Code also gets a teacher resource position, as does Bartow L. Those positions are to aid in the implementation of the program. There's a finite stopping point when the grant funds end, which is usually at the end of year 6. At that point in time, your staff is trained, your program is implemented, your technology is in place. We generally hold some of those grant funds back for the final year so we can actually replace the technology, and they start out with brand new technology their first year after the grant. So all of those pieces are already in place. At the point in time where the grant ends, we do not ask the district to pick up those TRST positions or any of the other positions because they're either self-sustaining or at that point in time, those personnel return back to other jobs within the district. And that's part of their interview process. So everyone understands at the very beginning of this process that this is a job with a finite timeline.
And if you pay if you hire an assistant principal to run the Cambridge program, I guess the enrollment, then the additional enrollment would pay for that unit in an ongoing way. That's how that's supposed to work.
Yes, and what else would pay for that is the testing components multiplied by the number of students that are testing and what you've built up over the previous years, while the grant pays for that position, also allows you to offset the cost of that position.
Okay. All right. Again, I think I'm inclined to vote to let it to move forward. I sincerely think that we need a pretty detailed work session on this. Well, let me ask this one. Why Cambridge as opposed? I mean, was Cambridge required by the grant, or was this just an idea that we had that would be like as opposed to some other program? What was the thought process there?
So when I met with Tammy Dawson and Jason Looney, that was an interest that they expressed, that they were interested in pursuing. So we always try to be responsive to the schools and to the regionals who know those schools well. We also have an existing track record of success at Winter Haven, and we've had parent questions about a Cambridge program on this side of the county. So it's in response to community interest, the school's interest and commitment, as well as to the success that we've seen in the Winter Haven area.
Okay, and I guess one final thing again related to Crystal Lake. I mean, I think we need to decide what direction we want that school to take. Should we pour the resources into general education, or should we put, like, it seems like there's a couple of different directions going at once, and they may not be working compatibly, and so that's probably something we probably need to throw into this work session. That's not for you, Carolyn. Obviously, I don't think, but I think more for the board and the staff as a whole, because I mean I'm sympathetic to withering programs and trying to restore them, but if the goal is to make them wither so that we're strengthening what happens for the rest of the kids, that's another thing. Like we just need to know what that intent is and discuss it. So
and Mr. Hill is already having those discussions regarding some of the programs like at Crystal Lake, so he is following up on those programs as well. Okay. Mr. Wilson has been patiently waiting. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Superintendent. First of all, let me say, Ms. Bridges, thank you for your efforts. I will, of course, support this initiative and appreciate all the hard work you've done over the years in bringing these programs to our school district. But I do have some concerns about the recurring costs. And from this perspective, we're quite concerned about the unfunded mandates that are pressed down or pushed down from the federal and state governments. They ask us to do things, and then we have to find a way to fund those over time. And as I think about this, the things that the grant will cover have to be covered moving forward in the future. Like, for example, the higher quality technology, for example, just as an example, at some point in time, it has to be refreshed. If we're talking about training, that training has to be ongoing. If not, there will be no point in the grant to start with. So I am concerned about that. And I say that from this perspective. And I'm not going to, I would never suggest that Mr. Perone and his staff take this on, but you've heard me suggest someone with some process background and skills to do a thorough review of the entire district and look at what those recurring costs are. And I understand, I heard you say that testing will cover some of that, but I can't begin to imagine how it will cover all of it, or even a significant portion of it. Maybe, for example, you're hiring an additional assistant principal, and it will cover that part of it. But whatever benefits are, whatever we're bringing to the school district to maintain that, those costs have to be continually incurred. They have to be recurring. And so I think that's one of the challenges we have as a district is finding out what our recurring costs are, not just for these programs, but for all the programs we have in the district, and then identifying our priorities. These are important programs. There's no question about it. And I just want to make sure that we can sustain all of them financially over a period of time. So that brings to mind the concerns I'm hearing about Crystal Lake. Were we able to sustain that funding, the funding they needed once they got that program up and running? Is that possibly one of the challenges they face there? I don't know, but I worry about that. I have great concerns about that. So I'm all in favor of it. I'm supporting it, and again, appreciate all your efforts. But I hope that at some point in time we can do something in the way of a comprehensive review of those things that require recurring funding moving forward, so we don't get stuck in this trap of never having enough money to do the things that we need to do for our school district. So those were my thoughts, really not just a question, just some thoughts I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. We have a question from Ms. Fields.
I don't really have a question. Good morning, Carolyn. I wanted to kind of reiterate what Ms. Reynolds said about how much we appreciate the hard work that you and your staff, your former staff now, have done to ensure that we are competitive and we're providing choices for our students. Mr. Hill, I believe you were the principal at Auburndale High School when we transitioned some of those students from Auburndale to Channel Rock. And I think the reasoning for that was that because at that time, Auburndale was completely overpopulated with students. And there was a lot of discussion concerning making sure that there was a good balance of students that were leaving Auburndale going to Channel Rock High School. And I know it's been a struggle. We had a lot of meetings, we had a lot of input from the community there. And I know that we're making some progress. It might be a slow progress, but we are making that. And I think it's great to have these additional choices so that our parents and our students can have an opportunity to look at things that might be a better fit for them than where they currently are. I think all the schools that have been identified definitely could have some enhancement. And I know that we have made some progress at every one of the schools that is being identified today for the additional Cambridge opportunity. I think Cambridge has been very successful at the Winter Haven High School. And I believe that it can also be successful at the schools that's been identified here. And the other thing is, Mr. Townsend is correct when he was wanting to know if we're just basically just saying, go forth. We're not approving anything today. Correct me if I'm wrong, we're just basically saying to you guys, continue the work and hopefully you'll meet your guideline by the end of this month. And we don't even know if we're gonna even get the grant. We'll be hoping and praying that we will get it, but we have nothing guaranteed for that. And if and when we get it, then you'll come back and answer a lot of the concerns that the board members might have, or even concerns that we haven't even thought about having. Is that correct, Carolyn?
Yes, ma'am. So what we're doing at this point in time, we're just getting your approval to move the grant forward into the application phase. And then when we come back, we'll have all of those details worked out. We'll have the job descriptions. And again, I just want to reiterate, one of the reasons that we looked at Cambridge was because there is a great deal of sustainability built into the program. Just like Winter Haven High School is even helping to implement the program at Denison, the dollars that are generated, which are considerable, can help support some of the work that needs to happen at Blake and Cumbia as well, just based on those resources that are generated.
And I will be supporting, giving you approval to go forth, and hopefully this will come to pass. And at that time, we'll be able to come back to the table and address the concerns. And maybe Mr. Davis will be present to answer some of the transportation concerns that others have.
Yes.
So good job, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Fortney?
I just needed clarification, Mrs. Bridges. How do the Winter Haven High School Cambridge students get accepted to that program?
They are part of, because they are not a magnet school, they are a high school choice option. So they, just like IB students, sit for the SAT test and are rank ordered by academics and are offered seats in that order.
Yes, ma'am. That's and then I needed to have that out in the open because I thought I heard you say that the kids going to Tenor Rock would take the same test. Did you say that?
No, ma'am. I said they would not. They would not, because they are coming on board as a magnet school, and magnet schools are not permitted to have academic qualifications to enroll in the program. The first priority will be those students who complete the Blake or Cumbie Blake program, and they will roll into it. And then remaining seats will be open to anyone in the community that wishes to apply. Now, once you apply and are accepted by that random lottery, then you have to meet the academic criteria to be successful in the program. So there will be some work that goes into that.
Yeah, I think that's important for everybody to kind of understand, because to me that's a big deal. You know, you want to open it up, but also you want quality, not
Right,
just quantity.
right.
Thank you. I'll be supporting it as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Back to Ms. Reynolds.
I just wanted to clarify one thing, and then I also had a question. Mr. Townsend asked at one point why Cambridge. From the Winter Haven area perspective, our parents love Cambridge because it encourages kids to still be kids. And correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, Carolyn, but if they don't choose to do Cambridge in every subject, they may choose to do all Cambridge math and all Cambridge science and then have regular history and English. But the goal is that they still play soccer, they still do the track team, they still are in the band, and they still can do those other extracurriculars, and it doesn't become so highly academic focused that they lose the opportunity to have social life that high schoolers really need. So I think that that's a great choice and a great opportunity, because IB isn't for everyone. And it's, you know, it's hard and it's a lot. So I'm very thankful we're looking at moving Cambridge there as well. But I did want to ask to make sure that it will be at least an 11-month AP itinerant for the Cambridge program. I know in Winter Haven, we had some issues a couple of years ago that their testing goes well into the month of June, and they had an 10-month AP, and she was having to come in like 3 to 4 weeks past her contract to manage testing.
Yes, ma'am. We will budget for an 11-month assistant principal for that very reason. And we'll also have some extended days offerings as well, just because as test results come back, that at least gives that assistant principal the option, if they choose, to come back, clarify anything that might be questionable, and make sure that students know exactly where they are when school starts.
Awesome. And I spoke to the Cambridge AP yesterday, and she was very excited to let me know that they had brought in more money this year than the IB programs. So I do think at Winter Haven, it's become very self-sustaining, and that they're able to pay for all of their teachers and the additional AP and transportation through those Cambridge funds that it brings in.
Yeah, it's very substantial.
5. Is that correct, Carolyn? That Cambridge at Winter Haven's in year 5 or 6?
Yes.
They're about the same place that we would be at the end of the grant.
Thank you. And that's very important because it does sustain itself. I believe after year 4, you'll really start seeing the sustainability of the program for the school. Ms. Miller has a question.
Hi, Carolyn. Can you tell me the enrollment at Tenorock?
I believe it's 1680, but I don't have that right in front of me. So if that is incorrect, I will send it. I'll send a correction.
And it's 1680 currently? That's the current enrollment, 1680? Did we survey the community and our staff of any of these schools?
I know we had that discussion with Tammy Dawson and Jason Looney, but I can't speak to that. In this day and age of COVID, I'm not sure what they were able to do on a short timeline.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate you spending the time to answer these questions. And I will support this moving forward, because I was pulled aside by a couple of AP kids at Tenorock asking why there wasn't equity there for them. And I understand that. I am concerned with the implementation because of what's happened at other schools. So we can have that conversation later. But thank you for the word that you're giving us today, and how this will impact those students.
Thank you. Mr. Townsend?
On the self-sustaining aspect and the money generated by the testing, where does that come from? Do the kids' parents pay for the testing? Where is that coming from?
So the testing is all done by the school, and it is then sent to Cambridge central offices for the scoring of that testing. Once a student passes the testing, the state of Florida has set aside funds that reimburse not only the cost of testing, but the cost of the program itself. So just like International Baccalaureate, you have that piece. They've recently added Cambridge in the last 4 or 5 years also for that reimbursement. So it does not come from the students, the families, or the district. It comes as a
Okay.
separate funding source through the state.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. And we have Ms. Cunningham.
Thank you so much, Madam Superintendent. I did want to make just a quick few comments. First of all, thank you to Ms. Bridges and our team, Ms. Amato, for working so hard to bring this to us. These grants are a lifeblood for our district to be able to offer academic rigor, excellence, and equity across our district. I know of several kids that have been in the Cambridge program in Winter Haven and have heard nothing but praises, both from the students and the parents going through that program. I'm so excited that we offered that. And while, yes, it takes a little bit, to get it up and rolling, and if you will, get the bugs out, if that's the right word. But once they kind of got up and running, because it was the first one in our county, I just can't applaud Ms. Williams and her team at Winter Haven High School for working so hard to implement this and offer this opportunity for students. And as others have stated, it is an opportunity for kids to get that extra rigorous education and also be able to spend time participating in a lot of extracurricular activities as well. Additionally, I will be supporting this. This is a grant. This is $5 million of money from the federal government to come into our county to provide these kind of options for our kids. And I understand our vote today is simply to approve going forward with the application. A lot of the questions that came forward today, primarily based on program information and how it's going to be orchestrated and a lot of the details, which will be coming forward to us if and when we get this application. Right now, we just have to approve it, move it forward. And then if we are chosen and if we are selected for the grant, then all of that detailed questions, we do need a work session in September to discuss all of the pieces. And I'm sure by then our staff will be bringing that as they have done in the past. So I support this and I'm excited for the children whose lives will be touched by this exceptional program. And the fact is we already have one in the county. So I think that's going to be very helpful as well. So thank you so much to all of our staff who's worked so hard. And we shall hopefully be able to move forward with a vote tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we have a question from Mr. Wilson. You have to unmute, Mr. Wilson.
Let me thank you. And let me say again, I want to be abundantly clear. I'm all for this. I'm all for the program. I'm certainly going to vote for it. I appreciate all the hard work that's gone into this, but I'm just doing the math in my head, and it just can't be possible that there aren't some additional costs that are funded by the district. It can't be fully sustainable. It would require $2 to $3 million a year in testing revenues. So I do have those kinds of concerns. And again, I'm going to vote for this. I think it's wonderful. I think we're bringing money into our district, but we continue to struggle with teacher raises, with healthcare costs and things of that nature. And I think at some point in time, we have to have a comprehensive review of recurring costs for everything we do. And we have to be, at some point in time, we're going to have to face that and think about how we're moving forward to ensure that we continue to keep teachers. I mean, it's not going to benefit us if we fund those programs, get them up and running, and we can't fund the teachers for them or fund the healthcare benefits or the other things we need for our district. So I hope that at some point in time we can we can find a way to address those recurring costs. Thank you.
Thank you. Point well taken. Thank you. With no more questions on item 1, we have item 2 coming before you next. Thank you, Mrs. Bridges, for returning again. We want to thank you. And while they switch off, we have policy updates that are coming. You will have policy updates regarding staff, and then you also have policy updates from Neola. I believe Ms. Dodge is going to come forward with the policy updates. The first one that we have, and there she is, as she comes, and she's going to start with the staff update. So you see 5430, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Dodge.
Good morning. I'm sorry. Okay, but where are the documents? The documents. Okay. The first item we have are the staff recommended updates. Class rank is the only policy on that list. That policy is being updated because of a discrepancy between the language in the student progression plan and the policy itself. Both have been adopted by the board as policy. The student progression plan was adopted most recently, and so we're modifying the board policy to match the language that you pass in the student progression plan.
Are there any questions on the staff policy revision? Okay, seeing none, Ms. Dodge, if you want to go ahead and go to the update by Neola.
Okay, the Neola recommended updates. The first one is dating violence and abuse, and that is the final policy update where we've added the retention of investigatory records language that you've already seen as part of the anti-harassment and a few of our other policies. This language mirrors what you modified and passed in the anti-harassment policies. And it's a new section in this policy regarding retention of records. The legal services for employees and public officials is a new policy and addresses under which circumstances the district would either reimburse or provide funding for legal services to mirror statute. The lending of board-owned equipment, district-issued staff email accounts, and district-issued student email accounts are a continuation of our updates of our technology policies that Dr. Barrios' staff have been working on over the past year. There are a significant number of those technology updates that they're working through, and we're trying to bring them to you a few at a time so that it is not overwhelming and a lot of language to decipher. The lending of board-owned equipment is adding language to ensure that any student identifiable information that is on any piece of equipment that a staff person may use or take home is protected, and it is their responsibility to make sure that it is protected. And then the district issued student email policy is a new policy, and it is a separate policy because the staff email policy talks about also protecting student identifiable information. And so that's not necessary for the student email policy. And so they are two different policies.
Okay, we have a question from Mr. Townsend.
Just concerning the records retention on, I think it was the dating violence one. You alluded to it reflects what, because we had a discussion about retention some time ago around the anti-harassment. I just wanted to make sure I understood what you said, right? That this is essentially, or this is the language we adopted for that too, in terms of retention.
That's correct. Based on your discussions, the board had made some modifications when we initially brought those policy recommendations. And so those modifications were mirrored when we updated the dating violence and abuse policy as well.
Thanks.
Thank you. Another question from Ms. Fortney.
Thank you, Superintendent Byrd. Ms. Dodge, back to the staff is responsible for, can you read that again, please, about the student information?
Sure. There's language in both the lending of board-owned equipment and the district-issued staff email account that talks about protecting personally identifiable information regarding students because of and aligned with FERPA.
Align with what? I'm sorry, you cut out.
FERPA, the federal requirements for
okay.
protecting student
Yeah.
information.
Yes, and how would that look like if a teacher was hacked by folks, or somebody got into the computer? I mean, we're not all technology whizzes. I don't want somebody to get punished for something that, you know, I can think of, and I know this deals specifically with student privacy, but I had a teacher friend once that Googled something very innocent and it came up like something terrible, uh, right in front of her class. It, can you address that a little bit for me, please? Because it's always a tedious thing, even at a school, trying to send an email about something that might be occurring in your classroom that needs direct attention. Do you understand my question?
Yes, I do. The
Thank you.
language refers to making sure that their only responsibility is to make sure that a piece of technology that they have is locked down or secured so that if it is lost or misplaced, your average person wouldn't be able to access personally identifiable student information. Hacking is a whole another level of accessing either emails or technology. But the employee's responsibility is to have done their due diligence to lock down the information.
And as long as they do that, they would not be held responsible.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on this item? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Dodge, for the updates that you're bringing forward today. The next item on the agenda is item 3, and that's going to be our budget updates coming in from Mr. Perone, and he's going to come and he'll do budget updates. Thank you.
For you folks.
Why won't it share?
Well, we may be doing this without a shared screen again. So unfortunately, I don't have a huge update for you because we have not received the final budget yet. We were hoping to get that today or yesterday so I could share something with you. But so what I had to share was just some minor updates on the current budget, the way it is, and that we have the minor changes are we've updated our fund balance a little bit. It's actually going to end the year a little bit higher. I think I reported 4.8 or 4.9. We're just under 5 at 4.98. So that's good. I'm hoping that will continue. We only have a couple more weeks to add things in and out. We go through August until we finalize that, but hopefully we'll end the year over 5. So that's the good news. What I did do on the sheet, and I will send this to the board so you will have it. We talked about some increases in the area of mental health in the budget, and Dr. Steinke and I talked about that at the last meeting. I have taken that out because the CARES Act will cover that. That doesn't mean it has to stay out. We could put it back in. again, that's going to be a board decision. But again, that was good news that we could do that. The problem and the concern I'm having with the CARES Act is what most districts are trying to do is take that money and set it aside for the inevitable, which is either some kind of cut in the middle of this year, or the fact that next year when we go to fund the budget, we're going to be at a shortfall. So they're kind of setting that aside. So using some of that could be problematic, but you know, we have some time to figure that out. I mentioned that we probably would have a long meeting in July, and that's becoming more apparent since we still don't have a budget, and we are at June 15th, and you don't meet again. I know you have a meeting on the 30th. I could send out, at that time we should have something. I'll send out an update for your review so that when we sit down in July, we'll go through that. So on the sheet that I have that I will send to you, by taking that money out in the budget and using it in the CARES Act, we have a budget that's projected at ending at next year at 3.535. That's not ideal. We obviously always want a budget so that we project closer between 4 and 5%. And maybe with the end of year and we have some additional savings, we will get there. When you get the document I have, there is a bottom line there where I put the CARES Act funding in. And I know you've heard the number 34 million for the CARES Act. When you see my number, it will be roughly 26 million, because we had to take out three things. One is the 10% that the state took from our funding, which will go towards our summer program. We had to fund the charter and the private schools. So that roughly is about 9 million of the 34, or 8 million. So we end up with 26. I don't want that to be a shock when you see it. Say, wait, I kept hearing 34 million. So you will see that difference. If we set that aside and do not spend that, I added that into the fund balance, and we would end the year at just over 6%. Again, if we add that and do not allocate it and spend it. So the next question is the CARES Act and how it can be spent, what it's supposed to be spent on. We have to file to the state by the 30th of the month. We are meeting this week. The team that will be dealing with those funds and the expenses. And we have to come up with a plan. The one thing I bank on is the last line there where it says these funds can be used to maintain current staffing levels. And I think that that's what other districts are doing and using, that they will fund current staffing levels to beef up their fund balance for the year 2021, which is going to be brutal in our expectation, in our estimation. So I apologize you don't have this in front of you. It appears again as not so bad news. I just worry that either something something changes in the governor's budget between now and the 30th, or that they go back in the middle of the year and make some kind of cut like they did in 07, 08. And that is my concern. So I'll keep you posted. I will try to get you an update of the budget, and we will give you an informational what we send to the state for our CARES Act plan, because you'll have that on the 30th.
Thank you, Ms. Perron. I know we have some questions coming in, and I do want to say to the board members that as we were talking to other superintendents, that is, as Ms. Perron stated, I know he's doing a finance call, and I believe we have a call coming up today. As he's doing those calls, that is what all the districts are preparing for. They're preparing for if there is going to be a reduction, it's going to come mid-year, and they're preparing for the 21 school year, which they're looking at, there could possibly be a lot of drastic cuts. So that's why they're beefing up their fund balances to hopefully help absorb some of those cuts. You will probably hear some of the districts are already cutting a lot of staff right now, preparing for what could happen in the event of the mid-year cuts coming in and for the reduction for the next school year. So I know we have Ms. Fortney has some questions.
Thank you, Superintendent Byrd. Yes, you just read my mind as usual. But I share Mr. Prone's concerns. I just want to clarify, the budget has not even hit the governor's desk. Is that correct?
He has not signed it. I believe they have to have it to him by the 15th, and he has until the 30th at that point. So we, and I know Wendy has probably stepped out of the room over there. It does, if he actually has it on his desk yet, but I believe he has to hit it by the 15th, and then something just happened to our screens, and then he has to have it signed by the 30th.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that for listeners.
On his screen, he's now sharing his screen.
Okay, a little late, but there it is. Hopefully I did a decent job of explaining that without having it up, but you will see scroll down. You'll see the here the 3.5, and then adding the 20 million in CARES Act, less the 5.3 million that we discussed for the unfunded behavior costs that we cannot pay out of IDA anymore. So again, this is up for discussion, and we'll talk through July, and when we go to sit down and do the tentative. I do want to say, I did say 2021 was a concern. I misspoke. I meant 21, 22 is 21. The year where we're going to have some issues, I believe.
And we have some questions from Ms. Reynolds.
Hello, thanks Mike for putting this together. And if you could send us a copy as well, that would be very helpful. Just because I'm blind as a bat, so it's a little bit enlarged. But I just want to say thank you for putting this together. I realize that it's ever changing and we won't know for another couple weeks, but I do appreciate the work you've put in on it. I have spoken to several board members in other districts, and I think at this time it would be irresponsible for us not to put the CARES Act money into the general fund and making sure that we're holding it for when the rainy day comes, because it looks like it's about to be a hurricane. So I do appreciate the proposals that you've put forward. I did want you to elaborate a little bit on, because I know it's been in the news recently, but what the requirements have been for sharing with private schools and how that amount has been determined. Is it all private schools we're sharing with? Is it following students? Just kind of if you could elaborate a little bit on how that is being allocated.
Yeah, so we had a meeting yesterday, and again, we're having the full team meeting on Wednesday. We follow the same rules with any other federal funding that we have. The private school number, the numbers I've taken out are worst case scenario. That assumes every school will take advantage and ask for the funds. They don't have to accept them, and so that number may go up. So that is a worst case scenario. And again, we follow with the charters the same methodology per FTE, and how we do that with Title I schools is the same. And so that's how we are giving away roughly 4 or 5 million to those schools if they so choose to participate.
How is the amount per school determined? Is it based on how many students they have, the size of the school?
Yeah, with the private, and because it's federal, so they have to be Title I, and then it is, I'll have to get you the formulas from the federal funding office. They gave me the estimates. I took them out. I didn't look at exactly at the formula, but we can get you those so that you see how we determined how much. And again, they're estimates. Partly because we use in Title I, we use a figure that we get in February by the number and the enrollment at that date certain. And so we use what those schools had, and but again, we follow the same formula. I will get you that information to show you how we calculate the amount that they may or may not choose to use.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you. We have a question from Mr. Townsend.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that and be a little more specific. How many private well, let me start first. Have we dispersed? We have not dispersed that money yet to them. We have not paid that to them.
No, they are doing, we are giving them the information. What we were sent last week was called a toolkit. And so we
Sent by whom? Who sent it?
DOE,
Florida
Suzanne,
DOE or US DOE?
from Florida, but through the Fed. It's a federal program that goes through the state.
Sorry.
So we we received the toolkit for us, but then we have to not only distribute that, but gather their information on each school will fill out the toolkit, how they're going to use their estimated amount of funds. Then we gather that and we send it back to the state. So we're kind of the middleman and do a lot of work. We are allowed to take an administrative fee. And so we're working on that right now as to how much we are going to hold back because it is quite a bit of work. So these toolkits are due the 30th. We as a district are working on ours Wednesday. And I have everybody I need in that meeting. And we will get that done. But then we have to collect from the 88 private schools, roughly, and then the charters also. So we kind of have to do a lot of work in a very short period of time.
How do we identify who the 88 private schools are? Like, is this through Step Up for Students?
Well,
is this through FTC? What is the identification of private schools?
I just met yesterday with federal programs, and we get a list from DOE, but then we have to double check it because it's not always accurate. So we do some cross checking and different things, and so it is. As I said, cumbersome, and it's inherent upon us because they can come back in July and say that we wanted that, but we never were notified, and we'd be like, well, we didn't even know you existed. But we have a pretty good system making sure we cover everybody, and that we send certified letters so that we can tell the state or the federal that we sent this information, got it signed, certified, and they did not respond. We've had that situation in the past, and we still were told to give the funds, even though we had all that backup. But we do go through a number of criteria and different things to make sure we cover ourselves as to giving them the information.
Well, there were some states. I mean, there's nothing in the CARES Act as law that says anything about sharing with private schools, right? I mean, this is a specific rule that has come down from Betsy DeVos, correct? That there's no legal there's no basis in the law for it. It's her decision to interpret it this way. Is that correct?
It's what we're going on based on everything we've heard. I know it's been a topic and it's been discussed, but we're going as if what we've done in the past. If we hear differently, we can change that.
Well, I mean, I think the entire state of Indiana rejected this. I don't know who. What happens? For instance, I'm not particularly interested in taking money away from our schools and giving it to Aikland's Angels or Kingdom Prep. I mean, things that are scams and things that are, I mean, Lakeland's Angels got $1 million worth of money from the tax credit scholarship last year, and it's a disaster. You know, I'm, you know, if the rest of the board is interested in saying we're just not going to do it, I'm interested in exploring that. You know, we might have to get the lawyer involved, et cetera. You know, I want a list. I would like to see the list we're going off of. I want to identify these schools. I want to take some pictures of some of them so the public knows what they're dealing with, what their money is going to. So, you know, please send all the correspondence on this you have around. I would appreciate it. You know, charter schools, for better or worse, are actually public schools. You know, they're funded by the public, even though they don't want to call themselves that often. These schools are not. These schools are private schools. They're businesses or independent entities. And you know, it's my understanding that the CARES Act did not contemplate including them. That's been added extra legislatively by executive fiat. So you know, I'm just dissatisfied with that. And then there's a larger discussion along those lines. I mean, we can kind of do this as part of the staffing plan and as part of the external operator plans. You know, we have no budget. We're going to have the giant cut in the middle of. I am for not doing the external operator contracts at all and just daring DOE to close those schools. They're not going to close them. They're desperate to get their child care back. That's money we need to be hanging on to, right? Frankly. So I will not be voting for those contracts tonight. If there's a vote to disperse this money to Lakeland's Angels, I'm not going to vote for that. You know, the state is not serious. The state is indifferent. That all they care about is pushing this out past the election. And I'm just, you know, I'm not particularly interested in doing anything they say, especially when there's nothing in the CARES Act itself that dictates this. So I'll just kind of stop there.
Thank you. Ms. Fields?
Mr. Perone, I had a couple of questions. The fund balance that we have here projected, does that encompass the monies that we received from Hurricane Irma, that we will be receiving from Hurricane Irma?
That is a great question. So yes, it does. And it is included in this. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but in the top projected fund balance, 4.98, the 43 million includes that 11. And I apologize because we moved it from the last presentation up into that. So it is part of that. So that is a concern because that, again, that goes back to that 2020, 21, 22 year that I'm concerned about because yes, it's part of the fund balance, but it's, and I know where you're going, it's non-recurring. So that needs to be taken into account.
Thank you. And also, as we are getting ready to discuss the superintendent search, we've got to find monies to pay for that as well. So I just want to kind of keep that in the forefront of everyone's mind. And Mr. Perone or Miss Bird, do you guys have any idea as to why it's taking the governor so long to approve the budget? Is it because of COVID-19 or just trying to figure out what the economy's impact is going to be on the state or what?
Yeah, I would say on the 15th of every month, they get an economic report. And I believe he's waiting for today's because it came out in May 15th to the 16th that's where they said they lost that $500 million or $1 billion. And I think they're going to see that the June 15th, which is the May report, will be similar, and then they may make different decisions based on what he sees. So I believe that's the holdup. But Wendy did say, Ms. Dodge did text me that she said Rumor has it it's coming out today, and that the Senate was heading over to the Capitol building in droves. So when that happens, usually something's coming down. So we should hear something very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from Ms. Miller.
Sorry, delayed to unmute. I think what Mr. Townsend was referring to as Indiana was actually the Department of Education. It would have been our Richard Corcoran saying no, which I doubt he will. What I do agree with is that this should be made public. I don't know why we are not doing more of that. Yes, there are 72 of those private schools that get vouchers in this county, and I know some of them that it's blatant fraud, but people just don't know. And so I think if we are tasked with handing money over, that we are also tasked with informing the public of where their tax dollars are going. And so if we said no to the DOE, they're going to take it themselves. He's going to take it, he's not going to make that decision and be as strong as that Indiana head of Department of Education. So they would just revert the funds and we wouldn't get them. But what we should be doing is making the public aware. We should advertise what we're doing and make that more of a public relations effort to work on the legislative side so people are informed voters. So that's my input on that. I do have a question, and this is going to come up again a little bit later, but you can answer it for me. In these contracts, these behavior contracts that are being paid for out of IDEA, serving these intensive behavior units, there's been question about these services going to students who are not ESE students. Are we paying for behavior supports out of IDEA that are not going to students with disabilities?
I'm bringing Dr. Sankey up. Hold on
Okay.
1 second.
Hi.
Hi.
No, we're not. That's exactly why that line that Mr. Perone has on this budget projections for the 5.2 million, because we're moving those contracts out of IDA over to the local budget for some of those exact reasons. Besides the fact that we can't continue to absorb all of those costs in IDA with all the responsibilities that we have.
Thank you. Yeah, my concern was that at the beginning, the initial intent was to serve, and that kind of grew. The audience grew of who they were serving, and I agree with you. IDA is not large enough to maintain that. So thank you for that information.
No problem.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Ms. Cunningham.
So can I just answer the other? Well, I don't know if it's
Go
a
ahead.
question or a comment. Ms. Pleasant has been hounding me to do a budget article, and I keep telling her I can't until we get numbers, and we thought we'd have them today, but and I haven't asked Ms. Bird, so I apologize, but if you want us to start working on that article with that information, we can start to do that through PR and start to get that message out about where we are, or wait until later today. We might get something. I don't know if that's something that the board would like us to work on, but we can do that.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Mr. Perone, we're going to actually get something out through the PR, and if they're heading over, they'll probably have those numbers. So Ms. Pleasant's probably ready to start working on that now, so we can push it as soon as you get the final numbers in there. Okay, Ms. Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Superintendent. I just wanted to echo a few things. Thank you, Mr. Perone, for trying to keep us up to date as best as you can. I know these numbers are moving targets as we move forward over the summer. I would like to have updated numbers, as you have indicated, as soon as obviously you receive them and can put them together for us, and emailing them to each of the board members for review and upcoming discussions. I just want to thank you. I know these are trying times for everybody, and hopefully there may be some good news coming out here later today. And I just want to say I'm excited that we are going to possibly be at our 5% fund balance by the end of this year, but I'm also realistic in understanding that there will be budget cuts from the state coming sometime this upcoming school year, the 2021. And we have to make some really good decisions because the school year of 21-22 is right around the corner. So we just need to be careful. We need to be mindful, but we need to have good information in order to make those decisions. And I thank you for your updates. And if we could continue to receive those as you have the opportunity to send those to each of us. So thank you so much, Mr. Perone. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, Ms. Fortney.
Thank you, Superintendent Byrd. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify the CARES Act money. From what I have read, that was a Tallahassee decision. And as a taxpayer, I do not support giving any money to a private entity, especially when they were able to apply for the Business Act. Also, I feel kind of like if what Ms. Miller says is true, if they're going to take it anyways, then why would we approve that?
Thank you. Ms. Reynolds.
I just wanted to echo a little bit of what you said in regards to putting out a PR release on the budget. I would encourage us to get it ready, but to wait and do so until once the budget's been confirmed, as we think it's going to be in the next 14 days is all he has. So I just would encourage us to wait until the budget has been approved to comment on what the budget is.
Sure.
Thank you. And yes, we will have them start drafting everything. And once they get the final numbers, they can start plugging in all of that information and make sure that we share that with each of you as well. Mr. Townsend.
Sorry, just a second. Oh yeah. To echo what Sarah said, I would like to hear from the attorney. It doesn't have to be right now. You can send a note to us. Saying what the legal authority being invoked is to force us to send that money to those 88 private schools. I would like to know what the legal rationale is for that. And again, I'm inclined to take a vote on this and vote against it. And if the state does have the power to do that, to disperse that money, go right ahead. But I think it's important, Ms. Miller talked about advocacy and talking to the public. We're talking about PR releases, but we, the 7 of us who are elected, are the people who are the first line of defense and the first line of communication with the public. And, they're relying on us as much as anything to tell them what's happening, why it's good or bad. I think it's incumbent upon us to use our votes, to use our voices, to inform the public of the really stupid and harmful things that are being done to it, by people who are supposed to be better. And I just like, it's not PR's responsibility to do our political work for us. PR is not a political function. We are. Politics is not a dirty word. It's how we decide who gets paid. It's how we decide who has power. And it's important for us as elected board members, if we feel strongly about a thing, to make sure the public understands that.
Mr. Townsend, the beauty of technology allows me to do research as I sit here and listen to the questions. It appears that the authority for sharing funds, CARES Act funds with private schools, flows from the guidance that was issued by the United States Department of Education, not from the act itself. It appears that there are several states that are challenging that. It looks to me at the moment like there were, from the article I just saw, there were as many as 8 states that were questioning whether they would do it, and there were 10 that had decided that they would. But it is the guidance from the United States Department of Education that includes that language, and it has been a source of consternation for school districts across the country.
It's not textual, as Neil Gorsuch might say.
Right. It is not legislative, and I saw a comment from Lamar Alexander, whose name will be familiar that he expected the funds to be distributed in accordance with how Title I funds are typically distributed. And that he believes that's what the legislature would expect. But I will delve into that further.
And the way Title I funds are normally expended would not involve us giving money to Aikland's Angels, correct?
Not to my knowledge, and it certainly
Okay.
would not include for-profit
Yeah.
charter schools.
No, they are
public schools.
included in our Title I. They have access to, the private schools have access to our Title I. That's why we are following that model.
Yeah, one of the points was that some private schools are for-profit, and I don't believe they're included.
Private schools are included. I understand them to be specific to IDEA funds, like to they're also entitled to Title I funds.
They do share Title I funds, yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you. Ms. Reynolds?
I just think if Wes, you're researching that, I think also probably looking into what authority the state would have to hold our funds. That I'm all for sticking it to the man, but not to the tune of Polk County Public Schools losing $25 million. I think that's a little bit risky. So I think it's important to know what the ramifications could be as well.
Okay. Mr. Townsend?
Yeah, I just want to point out that what you're discussing is blackmail. I'm perfectly fine for the state to take that money and do it itself if that's what it wants to do. I'm not perfectly fine to sit here and be blackmailed by the state of Florida on behalf of our kids and staff. The Supreme Court in Florida declared in the 76-69 suit that the state has the power to do this if it wants. I think if it wants to punish us for saying we would not make that choice, but that we defer to their power, which isn't even in the law. I think they can go ahead and do that, but they might fire 1,600 teachers, or they might withhold our money, or they might blackmail us. Is a bad way to be an elected official. It's why we are where we are 25 years on. So I just want to make that point.
Are there any other questions? Okay. Thank you. We'll move on to the next item, which is the district staffing plan.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Oh,
Good morning.
I can't hear you. I'm sorry. That was the delay. So presented before you is the district staffing plan. You'll notice in this year's staffing plan, it was much slimmer than previous year's staffing plans, in part because there were a number of reporting changes, not as many additions, and that's really it. Not as much money or funds added, given the projected funds and everything that's going on with the state funds. We were very strategic about not really adding a lot of costs to the district staffing plan. If you will look at I would like to actually direct your attention to the worksheet general fund. It is after the executive summary pages. And then after the job description page, it is just essentially the accounting sheet for everything. Let's see if I can hold it up for you. It looks kind of like this. This is
Hedger, are you able to share your screen?
I don't have it on the screen. Is it on the screen? No.
No, I mean, I've printed it, but yours is nice in color, so we can see how they all, how it applies, but are you able to share that?
Hold on for 1 second. If you give me 1 second, let me try to find it out of the agenda, okay? Okay. Thank you for your patience. So actually, I'd like to bring your attention to the worksheet here. This shows you a breakdown per department as to what has been added and what has been removed and or unfunded. You'll see that under the deputy superintendent, we've added a number of PBIS facilitator positions from the Mindful Schools grant or from the mental health allocation. In addition to that, we have unfunded in support services. We've unfunded a senior coordinator support services. And then we have funded a director of support services. And then we also have unfunded a fuel station specialist, which is a savings of $28,000. If we continue, we've collapsed some positions here, unfunded some TRSTs, grant technicians in teaching and learning, and specifically in the Department of Innovation. In fine arts and ESOL and mentoring, we've unfunded the lead mentor and the full release mentors. In multiple pathways, there have been 2 unfunding of positions, the TRST and the school psychologist. However, we have added the intervention facilitator and the child care services specialist. In professional development, we have unfunded it looks like an analyst in professional development as well. Overall, the biggest additions that we have, if we move down to student education, we have funded a senior manager ESC area for transition services. We funded a clerk specialist, but we have unfunded 2 general clerks, which is a savings of $3,700. If you look in the notes over here, 2 of the positions are being paid for out of IDEA. And so that was a savings for us in terms of the general budget. However, the IDEA budget did increase by $84,913. In addition to all of those things, the mental health support. So I know that some of you have asked for specifically mental health services and for those to be funded in conjunction with Dr. Sankey. These are some of her changes. And so the behavior specialists, you'll see that 5 of them are now funded to general fund, and then they are unfunded from the mental health fund. That does come at a cost of $1.1 million to the general fund. And then from the mental health fund, that is $398,000. And in business services, we are unfunding a director of federal programs from the general fund, and then funding a senior director. We are unfunding a senior director of federal programs and funding a director of federal programs, which is a savings to both the general and Title I fund of $3,681 and $20,858. I realize that I skipped student services, so I apologize. We are unfunding one school social worker and then funding a community outreach coordinator and social worker. And that is at a cost to the mental health funds of $14,000, but the general fund is saving $2,261. The other additions that we're making or changes that we're making are the business services charts. Chart A, we are funding an accounting specialist 1. We're moving an accounting specialist 1 to an accounting specialist 2. And that is at a total cost of $10,000 overall. So there's an overall cost to the district staffing plan of $1.4 million. Do you have any questions?
Ms. Miller?
I'm going to get this mute thing down, I promise. I do have a couple of questions. Thank you for providing this. And I think the color coding was very helpful to go through and look. I appreciate that position you added that you just talked about, that transition position. That is very important. I have a question on page 17. Well, it's 17 on the printed copy. I'm not sure what 17 is
if you
on
look at
yours.
the chart, it's a chart number. If you want to tell me what the chart number is, that'll be more helpful.
17.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
so
17.
Chart 17.
Number.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to scroll to chart 17.
Okay. There we are.
Okay, chart 17.
Can you, and I know it's changed. I remember when John Small was here, things had changed about how the principals work at the adult schools. I don't see that on here. And so, and I am concerned, and this community is concerned. We have a lot of support for our Auburndale East Side adult area school that provides a ton of services and writes grants and things that the principal wasn't responsible for a few years ago. And we are paying that person like an elementary AP. And when you have that, and at the same time, you have the grad academy who has 5 teachers and maybe 42 students paid like a middle school AP, or Fresh Start who has a few, it just doesn't seem equitable for the work that's being done at East Side. And it's been brought to my attention by them from the community that understands that she does a lot of work and they don't want to lose her. Can you talk about how we compensate that adult school leadership, because it's not considered a principal, even though she's running 16 sites?
Mrs. Bird, did you want to address it or do you want me to?
I'll go ahead. That school, yes, it is set up as an assistant principal, and I believe the leader at that school is just entering the pool. So if we move that, we will have to put a principal there that is a current principal in the pool as of right now. And so it's been set up as an assistant principal, like we set up the some of our other school sites have assistant principal, such as your CFAA and different ones of that nature. And it sits underneath Mr. Cochran in that area. And that's why you don't see it there, because it's assistant principal, which flows up through that in that chart.
Okay, thank you. I would like to have further conversation on the equity of that. And that might be happening in other places, but for someone to be serving the number of students, that school is very successful and providing sites, 16 sites, and writing grants. We're going to approve them in the board meetings, several grants they're operating as a principal. So I'm hoping we can make that change to compensate them that way and we don't lose talent, because we are trying to attract strong leadership. So that was my question here. So thank you for explaining that, and hopefully we can talk about making that change. I had another question.
I can't hear you, Mrs. Miller. You're muted.
I think you muted
On-
back, Miss. Go ahead.
Chart number 22, and it's referencing our student services, social workers. So many of them are paid locally, and then there's 2 paid through Medicaid, and there's 3 psychologists. Do we have the availability or the opportunity to bill Medicaid for more of these positions?
Hold on for 1 second. I'll have Dr. Steinke come over and answer that.
Okay.
So the way that that works is all of our social workers, all of our school psychologists, and various other itinerant service providers do reimbursement for Medicaid dollars. They go all back to the district's local fund, general fund. And then Mr. Prone and his team just determine how many of the positions they're going to specifically say are funded out of Medicaid dollars reimbursement, and then how many are funded out of non. But it's not that we're not paying for those positions out of Medicaid. It's just that all of the Medicaid reimbursement goes back to the local fund. Did I explain that well enough, you think? Okay, he says yes.
And so that, and I know we're kind of, the Medicaid billing is relatively new. We've done it for a few years, thanks to Dr. Steinke and what she's brought here. I just want to make sure that we're taking advantage of that, because some of the charter schools are able to bill Medicaid at a much higher rate and more often, and it might be because of what they're providing. But I don't want an untapped resource to help, that could help support multiple students. And I just saw there were so few that are actually funded.
We're maximizing our Medicaid funding and reimbursement as much as we can with the services that we provide. And we have increased that over the last several years. So it's continual work in progress. We're bringing on more and more service providers and then having them do that.
How many people do we have employed to bill Medicaid?
What do you mean? As far as,
do we do straight billing? Do we bill, or do we use contracted services to bill Medicaid?
we do both. Our direct hire employees bill or do reimbursement, and our contracted service providers also do reimbursement. We put it as a part of our contract that with those contractors that they have to bill Medicaid, and then we get the reimbursement.
Okay, great. I have one more question while you're there, because you'll just have to come back.
Okay.
On the back of the job, we've had added job descriptions of a certified behavior analyst and behavior techs, which I think is important. And we've talked about that for years to try to cut costs. Is this an addition? How will they serve next to the $1.2 million INVO behavior contracts? Are these people that are going to teach our own staff, our paras? How will they work in conjunction with the investment already made into behavior?
So the 2 INVO we have 4 contracts with INVO, as you probably see on the agenda in the contract section. 2 of them are for behavior. The 1 contract for behavior with them for the intensive behavior units remain the same for next year. But the other contract, which is what is for more of our ABA therapy with board certified behavior analysts and registered behavior techs, we actually have reduced that contract. We went from 10 BCBAs with them to 5, and from 20 something RBTs down to I think half of that. And what we're doing is we're replacing what we cut from INVO with our own direct hires by building up those positions for an overall cost savings of about $230,000.
Yeah, I would think the more that we can hire and train would be cost effective. So
Yes.
thank you for adding that this time.
No
That's
problem.
all.
Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Fortney?
Yes, thank you, Superintendent Byrd and Ms. Porteous. I love the organizational charts with colors, as I've told you many times before. I was kind of disappointed not to see the names, but I hear we're going to get those in about a month. My concern obviously is going to be with the social worker reclassification. Can you explain that? Because I'm under the impression we only have 21 social workers for 105,000+ kids and families. is that going to add an added burden to the 20 that are left that actually serve schools? Or how is that going to work?
Dr. Steinke is actually going to address that as well. Hold on for 1 second.
Thank you.
Wearing my human resources hat today. Every year we have one of our 10-month contracted social workers that we have to do an extended contract for during the summer to cover our responsibilities as a district for Department of Juvenile Justice students. And as you know and have seen, our tassel program has grown tremendously over the last several years. So what we've done is we've actually taken a 10-month social worker position that's vacant and repurposed it into a 12-month coordinator social worker position to do the same work ultimately that they're already doing during those 10 months plus the additional 2 in the summer, just through different contracted purposes, and made it a 12-month position. So we're not losing any of the services or anything that we're already providing. We're just making it a 12-month position to make it a little bit more appropriate to the work.
Would that be beneficial model for the remaining social workers to do a longer contract period to stay in contact with our kids?
A lot of the work that the social workers do during the summer is specific to that DJJ responsibility and tassel. And we've not necessarily at this point in time determined a need to have them working 12 months. We do have the ability, and what we've done this summer actually is our mental health facilitators that do a lot of the mental health services for kids throughout the year. They have been working more this summer as far as providing those supports and services, because that's a little bit more specific to their job role. So we've been able to cover some of the summer things for them that way.
I just know with the report that the social worker piece was very important to the overall well-being of our ESC kids and our gen ed population.
Yes, ma'am.
So I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from Mr. Townsend.
A couple of things. I wanted to echo Ms. Miller's point about the adult school. I think the assistant principal there currently is our administrator of the year, if I remember that right. Doing an excellent job there. But beyond that personal aspect to it, it seems the volume of work and responsibility, coupled with the rate of pay, would seem to make that a difficult job to recruit for. I mean, it seems like we've gotten lucky and gotten somebody really, really good in there right now. And I think a position it needs to be created to match. It needs to be built to match what the job expects, so that we can recruit for it. That's just one thought there, and I hope we'll take a closer look at that. Wanted to ask about a couple of things that are in some ways holdovers from previous discussions. I think like the chief of staff position, with the superintendent's retirement, like, does it make sense to hold that position out of the staffing plan this year and let whoever the new superintendent is decide on what they want to do with that position? Maybe the superintendent can give an update on whether there's a hire waiting to be made on that or not. I like just kind of trying to get a sense of what's the best way to proceed with that position.
I will address that. As I've spoken with the chair, understanding that there's a new superintendent. Anytime you have a new superintendent come in, I truly believe if you have open spots that you can hold off, you allow them to fill those positions. So that is a top position. I will not be filling that position at this time, as I discussed with her. I will be holding it, and when that person is named, then they'll know they have that position. We will leave it in the org structure, so as soon as that person is secured a contract with the district, then they can move forward to hiring their very own chief of staff position at that time.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that. That makes sense. Secondarily, can someone give me, and this relates to some of the questions of advocacy we've been discussing. Can someone give me the overall budget for the lobbyist position. I know we're spending a good bit of money um, for that position to spend the session in Tallahassee. Um, I'm curious what the travel cost of that position is, and wonder if that's not something that can be done. As I mentioned before, right now that position is kind of odd in that it's both policy and it's advocacy, and I think it's sort of torn between those two things in ways that are unfair to a position. I think in a lot of ways there's disagreement on the board, or at least discussion on the board about what the nature of both of those roles should be, and I think it puts Ms. Dodge in a difficult spot. So I'm wondering whether what it would be helpful to know what the overall budget for that position is, in terms of full cost, like for travel, for et cetera. So I guess that's my first request. And then the second request is, I think I asked to talk about this a few months ago, what we want the nature of those two roles, which are kind of jammed together into one role, to be, because I think both of those functions are really important. There's some disagreement amongst the board about what they should be, how they should be done, and ideally we could talk about that before we approve the staffing plan, but this seems like the time to raise that again. And then I want to say that this is complicated by the odd fact that Ms. Dodge filed an ethics complaint against me that was just dismissed, based on me tweeting about a book that I contributed a chapter to for free. The public should know that and take that into consideration in anything I'm discussing here. But I would like to have an intelligent consideration of how those functions can work moving ahead. So that's what I'm asking for.
Thank you. We will provide the board with the cost of the transportation costs of Ms. Dodge. I can tell you that from the previous years, those costs have been reduced down for Ms. Dodge with transportation, but she still does all the traveling. Ms. Dodge provides a wealth of knowledge for this, not only this district, but what we do around the county and the services that she provides for us. But we will provide those additional costs to you at later afterwards, and when we gather those. Ms. Cunningham?
Thank you, Madam Superintendent. I just wanted to address Mr. Townsend's comments. I just want us to be mindful. It's fine to ask for information, but the bottom line that there is a line between board responsibilities and the board information and our superintendent. And I feel that when we question positions that our superintendent has made, I feel that we are overstepping our bounds as board members. So I'm fine with us requesting that kind of information, but quite frankly, I feel that there's a very specific line between board responsibilities and the responsibilities of our superintendent. And I think sometimes those lines get muted. And I just want to be careful that we're being respectful of our superintendent and her staff, and that this doesn't become personal issues between board member and staff, and that we make sure that we stay within our lines as board members. Our job is to set policy and to approve a balanced budget each year. And I just am asking each board member to please be sensitive to the fact of what is board responsibilities versus overshadowing or overstepping that responsibility of our superintendent. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next question is coming from Ms. Miller.
Ms. Porteous, can you tell me if this document is fluid, it can be changed, or is this something that's being set for the rest of the year?
Well, actually, thank you for bringing that up. Given all the changes and what we expect to come out of the budget, it is something that can be changed. We try not to do it often. I think for the past 3 years, what we've done is taken just the staffing plan as a whole one time, and then what I've instructed staff, or what Mrs. Bird has instructed staff to do, is more so if we have a change, then we bring it in the annual staffing plan and not necessarily in pieces. However, if there are significant budget cuts this year in November or whenever they are from the state, and we will have to bring changes, and I may have to bring some pieces of it back depending upon what those cuts are. But great question. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I also, we've discussed this in the past. This is kind of leading to what I was talking about before. The equity in how we pay different staff members. Like I mentioned before, we have schools running with middle school and high school APs that have less than 10 teachers. These drop back in whatever programs, even between East and West area. East area adult is serving 16 sites, West area serves 1. I know you were doing an overview of that. Is that something ongoing where we're looking at? We also have managers, just middle managers that oversee no staff getting paid similar to middle managers that see multiple staff members. I just think what I hear from district staff when they're confident enough to call and share is that they feel that some of these salary ranges are not equitable. So is that something you oversee, or is that something we would contract out for someone else to review for us?
Well, it is something that I oversee, and it's something that I've been actively looking at since I've been here. My team and I are really examining each position and each department to make sure that they are equally staffed. For example, I'm just going to pick on Mrs. Usher. She did not have a senior director originally. But however, her scope is very large in terms of building and also facilities and also custodial. And so when we looked at the equity, there was no equity between, let's say, her department and teaching and learning, who has several senior directors. So we did add a senior director, I think, to her last year to provide additional assistance. And so my point is that we look at those specifically and we address them specifically. If you'd like to provide me with some details about that, maybe in an email, I'll be sure to look at it and provide you more of a equity statement, or why it is not as equitable as maybe one would hope it is.
Okay, I appreciate that. And the fact that this is fluid and can change, we may be able to take care of some of it without, making large changes. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome.
Thank you. Next question, Ms. Fortney.
Thank you. Yeah, Ms. Porteous, Ms. Miller actually hit on a couple of things, and your example was exactly what I was going to ask about. So thanks. But, I have the same issue with certain schools that have one guidance counselor versus, and they have 800 kids versus a school that has 2 guidance counselors with 600 kids. And I realize some of those are magnets and et cetera, and have their own set of rules, but still it's the equity issue. And the other part of her question was the organizational chart being fluid, because obviously we have a downturn in the economy, and history does show that our adult schools and our technical colleges tend to get increased enrollments. So it's good to know that we can adjust this to compensate for that at a later date. Is that correct? I'm hearing it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that is correct. And
Thank
just to
you.
touch on the school staffing is largely driven by the school staffing plan. There are certain exceptions in there. Center schools, magnet schools, and then your K-8s, they're staffed a bit differently. But if you look at the school staffing plan, I think what you vote on today, there are some variances in there. And so that would be helpful just to look at in the future. It is a bit prescriptive, but then there are some exceptions to rules that are listed in the staffing plan, the school staffing plan.
which I'm going to vote against Miss Porteous. Nothing against anybody, but that is my problem with it. But thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Next, Ms. Reynolds.
All right, I just wanted to address some of the comments on Ms. Dodge. I think that I've been up there with her several times. She is definitely envied by members from across the state, and the knowledge and the boots on the ground, ears to the ground ability that she's able to provide. She does report to the superintendent, and what she is advocating for is based upon what the superintendent feels is best for our district. We as board members have the opportunity to go to Tallahassee and contact our legislators anytime that we so choose. While I do believe that Mrs. Bird can do just about anything, I think being in Polk County to be able to run our school district here and also being in Tallahassee during session to know what's going on behind the scenes and what the murmurings are in the halls are probably something that we can't expect for her, because I don't think that time travel quite exists yet. And I'm pretty sure there's only one of her, though. With all that she does around the district, who knows? There may be another one running around that we see at events from time to time. But I just wanted to make sure that that's clear, that she reports to Superintendent Byrd, and is there for her to advocate for the district in Tallahassee while Ms. Byrd can't be there. That we as board members have the opportunity to go on our own. Ms. Dodge is always very gracious in allowing us to follow her around and introduce us to all the legislators that she's working with. And I would encourage anyone to take her up on that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Superintendent Byrd. I'd like to weigh in on a couple things. First of all, I appreciate your position on the Chief of Staff, new Chief of Staff position. I appreciate your wisdom in understanding the value of having someone new look for and find that person that works best with them, of course. But I think it's incredibly important that we continue to fund that position. You've heard me say this before, and I'm going to be pretty much a broken record on this. Most organizations don't do a very good job of assessing what recurring costs will be for their organization over a period of time. And I'm certain that there are many times we're talking about funding things that Mr. Perrone is cringing, thinking, geez, how are we going to make that happen? In recurring funding over a period of time. We've done the things we needed to do as a school district, and I'm not critical of anyone for making the decisions that we've needed to make in terms of funding, pay increases, and insurance for our teachers. It's certainly appropriate, but we really have set up a future board for a really tough time with our fund balance, because at some point in time, it's going to be a problem for somebody. And so I think that position, when that position is funded and somebody is placed in that position, can be very helpful in helping us assess future costs and mandates that are handed down from the state of Florida. So we can go back to the state and say, look, you're asking us to do this, but you need to understand what the cost is, and you're not funding that cost. We need to be able to make that case constantly and continually. And I'd like to weigh in on the lobbyist position. I think that not having a lobbyist would be a very unwise thing to do. And I think that having someone with a lot of experience and someone who's very competent in that field is incredibly important. And so I would be reluctant to change the way that's structured as well. So thank you, Madam Superintendent.
Thank you. Ms. Fields.
Thank you, Superintendent Byrd. I pretty much wanted to reiterate what Mr. Wilson just said about the importance of having a chief of staff. We had a lot of discussion on this, and I think we all agreed months ago that it was needed. And I don't think that anything has changed. If anything, it would be needed more as we're getting ready to embark upon a new superintendent of schools. And Ms. Dodge's position, we've had discussion before about the value that she brings. We've looked at the expenses that's related to her being in Tallahassee. We've looked at what other school districts do. And I believe that what we're doing is very similar to other school districts. I don't see that there's any question on whether or not we need to have that position. And Ms. Dodge has done an amazing job. She's very well respected throughout the state, even among her peers. And I just think we need to be very mindful what we say about our staff and what we imply about our staff. And some things does not need to be stated, in my opinion. And if we're not careful, we're going to end up getting a lawsuit. And I don't think any of us want to have to deal with that. So just, and Ms. Cunningham comments were very on target and very well said. I think we need to stay in our lane and understand what our lane is. We have an amazing superintendent of schools. And if we don't agree with her staff selection, and the new person coming as well, then we need to deal with the superintendent of schools, but not with the staff. That is not our job. That is not our job in any form or fashion.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Ms. Fizz. Mr. Townsend?
Okay, couple of things. First, we vote on this staffing plan, correct? We vote on it. It's required that we vote on this plan.
You vote on the entire staffing plan for the district. Yes, you do.
Right. So, I mean, there's really no point in us having a vote on it if we're not going to discuss how it relates to functions and priorities and those kinds of things. I guess that, addressing Mrs. Cunningham's issue. I think multiple functions have been discussed during this work session. During this session, multiple that no one seems to have any concern with. Again, I'm talking about the policy function and the advocacy function. There has been discussion among the board on both about how that's done. I think Ms. Dodge, from everything I understand, does exactly what she's been told to do for a very long time. I don't fault that at all. I think that approach as a function has not had good outcomes. I don't think, you can look at the teacher shortage, you can look at funding record, there's a million things. I'm not chalking that up to Ms. Dodge. I don't blame her for that. This is not personal. It's about what the function does and how the staffing plan fits into the function. Secondarily, we've had a lot of issues with policy and like how policy is created, how it's put together. I've read the same statutes all of you guys have, and I don't see where it says stay in your lane anywhere. I don't see what those lanes are. It says work together with the superintendent. Go look at it. If something's put in front of me to review, I'm gonna take it seriously enough to have some thoughts about it. Now, it seems pretty clear from what everybody's saying that no one's interested in having a further discussion about the policy and the advocacy function. That's fine. I'm one board member. But this is the staffing plan. This seems like the opportune time to address this question. And I do want to know what the full cost of that position is, because we're running into a time when the full cost of everything is going to matter. And can advocacy be done remotely? Those are things that are worth considering. I think the only reason Ms. Dodge's name gets brought into this at all is because I feel like I have to, in the interest of being transparent, say that she filed an ethics complaint against me that was dismissed for not being remotely an ethical violation. I wish I didn't have to do that, but I'd much rather be open and honest with the public. It's kind of embarrassing to talk about this, but I'd much rather be open and honest with the public so they can assess whether I'm being personal in addressing this, or whether I'm trying to think about the function. And that's really all I have to say about it. And I appreciate everybody's comments.
Thank you. Ms. Miller?
I would just like to mention that there are several positions that I'm interested in learning more about. Ms. Fields said that this has been discussed in the past as far as our advocacy or legislative liaison. I don't think that's been done since I've been elected. I think it gets kind of cloudy when Mr. Townsend mentions the ethics violation because people, swing to this as a very personal issue. I am interested in learning about multiple positions and how they're cost effective and how we can make them different. So I would like to know if this staffing plan, which we got a couple of days late, and I think it was some people were sick and didn't get it to us. Is there any way to do this in 2 work sessions and review the cost effective positions and how we do things and maybe how things have changed and positions have been added or cut? I just think we didn't get a lot of time with it. And there's multiple positions that I want to ask about as far as salary and not only salaries, but cost. What is it costing the district to run some of these positions? And have we thought about doing it a different way? Like just having more of that input. You're asking, and this goes across the board, to ask board members, elected board members who are answering to the public, whether others like that or not, we have to be able to answer for our decisions, and to make good decisions we have to ask questions. And so I would like more time with the staffing plan and along with other things that are given to us to be able to have that discussion, so we are making solid votes on what we agree with, because with this new budget crisis, everything's going to be under a microscope. It has nothing to do with the person in the filling the slot. It has to do with the slot itself. So is that available in the future to get this ahead of time, or the next thing we're working on to have a better discussion? I don't know how far in advance these are done.
So
Go ahead, Ms. Porteous.
I was just wanted to remind Mrs. Miller that you do have it, and it's not voted on until the next board meeting, which is July 28th. And so you do have a lot of time to go over it. Should you have any questions, you can always bring it up again at that time. That's number one. Number two is we do have, if you'd like to, I think you can make the request to Mrs. Byrd in terms of having it on the work session, or Mrs. Cunningham in terms of having it on the work session twice or sooner, or whatever your desire is, if you'd like to discuss it a bit more. And that's all.
Yeah, I think having it on the work session would be helpful, because I can ask you, you're great with answering questions, but the 7 of us can't speak about board topics unless we're in the same room. So I think we need that time. I would like to see that, and I can make that request through Susan.
And I'll say, Ms. Miller, these do sit, we usually get them to you before you actually take a vote a month in advance. We never ask you to vote on these back to back, really. We usually let you sit. Also, this year with the staffing plan, you don't see a whole lot of changes coming through, because we moved staffing plan, just rolled it forward with the changes that you see coming out of Dr. Stanky's division, which was the changes that you saw that Ms. Porteous went over. And some of them was just some collapsing of positions this year. So when there's usually a lot of changes coming forward, we spend more time on staffing plan. So I just wanted to make sure that that was known. Thank you.
I appreciate it. I also just wanted to say that some of us have been on the board less than 2 years, and some of us have been on the board close to 20. So some of these positions are not understood as well as others. And so I think it would be a good learning opportunity. I appreciate you offering that, to be able to put it on a work session. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Reynolds?
I was just going to elaborate a little bit. I know you mentioned asking Tedra questions, but asking the superintendent to have the department heads elaborate on their positions has been really helpful for me in the past, just because the department head can kind of give you a little bit more background normally in what they actually do. The job descriptions are great, but as far as what their boss is directing them to do has been very helpful. So that may be more help. If there's specific departments, that may be more helpful than having Tedra, who I do think probably knows the answer to 99% of my questions, but they can probably give a little bit more detail as to how those positions are used in real time and how they actually function.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? No other questions on this topic? Thank you, Ms. Porteous. You have several information items, and I want to talk about items 5 and 6. And items 5 and 6 is dealing with the external operator for Griffin Elementary McLaughlin. Because of the COVID and we were not able to assess the schools, we have been informed we must continue an additional year of support for those schools up underneath the external operator contract. So that's what's coming back before you at this time. I did hear Mr. Townsend say that he was not in support of that. I would like to let the board know, caution, if we do not move forward with an external extension of their contract for an additional year, immediately there's an impact to both of these schools with staff, and we have to move to closure. So not only that, it impacts all the TISA funds for the district, as well as the unified UNISIC funds for the entire district. So I just want to make the full board aware of that, because when we moved to having to extend that, there were several conversations that were had, and information was sent down to us that if we choose not to enter for an additional year, those things would be have an impact immediately. So I wanted to make sure, and I know Ms. Barnes is here as well, who's been working closely with our Red 2 to make sure that we continue our work. And she can give you an update on right before COVID, actually, and we had to dismiss schools, where those schools were looking academically. Ms. Barnes, are you here on staff? There she is.
Good morning. I guess I'm speaking. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to hopefully answer any questions that you may have. As Ms. Bird stated, yes, we are due to have the contracts for both Griffin Elementary external operator and McLaughlin Middle School external operator hopefully approved. I have been working with the state all year. And I did ask specifically questions about the timeline. I want to make sure that we are not penalized in any way. So you have two separate contracts before you. I'll start with Griffin in saying that no one's probably more disheartened than the staff and the principal at that school. They were well on their way to pulling way out of this hole. All of their data suggested that they were way up on all of the progress monitoring, and then COVID hit, and of course we can't go forward. The goal would be to continue with the contract because they've made great inroads with that external operator. There's not any real changes that are going to come into play, so they can get right to the work. The staffing has been amazing so far. Dr. Jones is only down to 2 vacancies that we know we'll have filled before school starts, and the external operator has been helping with that. And with McLaughlin, the same. They were going to make the grade. It was going to be tight. I won't dissuade you into thinking it was a piece of cake, but they have been working really, really hard and doing a lot of innovative things. There are some changes with that contract in that they're bringing in more curriculum support. They realized that that was maybe something that they got into a little late and they should not have, but that was based on all of the vacancies that they had. They have been tremendous with hiring. I know they've hired already 14 people, staff members, and within that, the company has been doing the work with the school. So our goal today is to present the contracts to you, to answer any questions that you may have regarding them. As Ms. Bird stated, I have a good working relationship with the Red, and I did ask what happens if by chance they don't go through. And it was shared with me what had happened with other districts, as Ms. Bird suggested, and I just know that we would not want that. Not that it's my place to say any more than that. And also, we would have to revert automatically to closure. And we're not prepared for that yet either. We wouldn't want that.
Okay, Ms. Fields?
Just for the record, Griffin Elementary is in my school district, and I've had conversation with the principal as well as some of the staff members, and I've heard nothing but great things about the relationship and the progress that's being made there. And so I will be supporting this contract today.
Thank you. Ms. Miller?
Hi, Ms. Barnes. Can you talk about what's happened in other districts that they shared with you? I'm just interested to know because, like you said, this is a force of a hand that there's not much we can do with. But the other side would be what have other districts had?
Yes.
I mean,
So what was shared with me, there were two districts actually. They went directly for the funding. So the UNICEF funds were taken quite substantially. We now have TISA funds, the teacher supplemental funding, and that's affecting a lot of our schools, and they will go after that money as well. And so that's a big concern because the administrations at those schools are using those funds that they didn't have to help offset and help these students receive the supplemental assistance that they need in various ways to continue their education. Not only that, this is an external contract. And so it was one of the three options that we had. So if we're not utilizing this option, then that forces us to go toward either closure or charter. Um, I'm not the governor, but my understanding is he's pushing for closure. So here we are in June, and that word in the community, I think, would just have such a negative effect when we've worked so hard to move forward.
so the public needs to understand that our professionals have done their job and they estimated that these schools would have made the grade. So the money coming out of this budget to pay for an external operator that could have been used for something else is being strong-armed because the other option would be to close the schools. That's the communication to the public. Thank you for your time, Ms. Barnes, and your work.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Ms. Cunningham?
Thank you, Madam Superintendent. I just wanted to say a few years ago, we had an external operator at one of my schools, and the principal was so very thankful and very appreciative of the work that these folks did with our teachers, our staff, as well as our students in helping them to find different ways to be able to educate them and bring obviously grades up. So having had that experience and having met the operators at the school, having had discussions with teachers, administrators, and students at the school, I found it, and we were in a budget crunch at the time, and we were looking at cutting positions at the school as well as the external operator for that particular school. And I came back, I had a conversation. It was a different superintendent and administration at the time, but I indicated that now that we've done so much work on the ground, we've had such a wonderful impact at the school, how can we possibly cut the very foundation that we have set in that school and basically leaving them high and dry, so to speak. And I said, I really think we need to revisit that and make sure that that school has continually has continued external operator and the individual positions that were there to help the students and continue the foundation for the following year. And then we could reassess whether or not we could do without that. So my thought is on both of these schools, McLaughlin being in my community, I know it's Lynn's school, but it's in Lake Wales. I feel very strongly that we need to continue that support and that foundation so that a year from now, there will be absolutely no doubt and no question that those kids are getting the best possible lift as they can. So I will be supporting this as well. Thank you, Madam Superintendent.
Thank you. Ms. Fortney?
Thank you, Superintendent Byrd. Yes, having actually worked at a school with an external operator, they were in my room, and working with Ms. Barnes out in my district's schools with external operators. I just have a comment / question. It's always because of test and punish, like the whole system is going to be like a chess game, you know, And yes, it costs us money. Uh, but 9 times out of 10, they do work. It's that extra support. And I think the key people understand that it is, like Miss Miller said, it is, it's like a chess game that we have to be smarter than the state. And we have to succeed under their rules as they are right now. And I know those teachers and administrators at those schools were disappointed because they wanted to prove their hard work had paid off. And they're working smarter, not harder in some cases, not every case, but the majority of them. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Townsend?
Yeah, it's just a couple of things about want to clarify on funding. So let me start. Where exactly does the external operator funds come from? It's $838,000 between the two of them this year, right? That's the total. Like that's coming from the USIG grant, or is that coming from general fund? Where is that coming from?
No, each year I have Mike to set aside, and I believe he takes it in general. He sets aside that because we always want to make sure that we're prepared. If you notice, he always provide a line item regarding turnaround schools.
Mm-hmm.
So we set that aside each year. And some of the schools actually ask for, once they come out, they ask for additional support to remain in their schools. We usually try to keep them for a year. Like we still got a group of D schools that we're going to still supporting. So you'll also see that because they want to keep that support going. You never give them the support and snatch it back the next year. You make sure you can sustain them over time. So we gradually back that support out, but he always sets that aside each year.
Okay, so the contract is paid by general fund. The TISA and USIG money is separate from that, correct? That's the real support money, isn't it? I mean, that's what goes and supports it, recruits people to go there, spends money. I mean, like the 838,000 from the general fund is to pay for the contract with the operators. The staff support really comes from the USIG and TISA funds, correct? Or is that not correct?
Well, some of those funds also, and Ms. Barnes can also elaborate. You have incentive funds with that's built in there in those funding models for the teachers. We pay them when they do additional tutoring, additional time. All that's part of those TISA and UNISIG funds. That's what that is. It's just not support for them. It's additional funding for the teachers. And Ms. Barnes, I don't know if you want to elaborate any more on that.
Thank you, and thank you for that question, Mr. Townsend. Ms. Bird is correct. In addition, there's personnel that's paid out of those funds because they've been able to secure additional coaches and behavioral supports, et cetera, and so forth. We do a lot of professional development. The new teacher supplemental money that just came about has gone even further to, yes, maybe incentivize some of those schools as well and provide more staff. But you are correct in that the money that's been set aside that Ms. Bird has mentioned would handle the contract piece of it. If the state is going to, for the lack of a better word, penalize us because we chose as a district not to enter into contract with these external operators for these schools, the funding that they would then hit will be your UNISIG funds and your TESA funds.
Right. And so the external operator funds specifically, the 838,000 between the two schools, what do the people we're paying with that do on a daily basis? Like what do they actually do? Like what's their typical day?
So at every school, they have what's called a lead person, and that individual is there generally a week on and a week off. So 2 weeks of the month, they are working, and each school is different. So I'm gonna start with Griffin. At Griffin, that model is more of an administrative model, working with the principal there through all of the academic programs, making sure that staffing is where it needs to be, going into the classes, making the adjustments, making sure that we can have that sustainable change, going over data but basically it's a more of an administrative model so that all of the leaders see what's in place and they are all owning the work and doing the work to support more hands on deck in that ramp. At McLaughlin and I'm sorry, and also at Griffin, they do have some coaches that come in. They have curriculum specialists as well. At McLaughlin, it's a much bigger lift. They have many more support coaches coming in. They also have a lead person there that's on a week and off a week as well. They're doing very intensive teacher training to help them implement and deliver the curriculum in fashions that's more engaging, hopefully. They're doing a lot more progress monitoring, but they are a typical day in a week consists of those individuals from those external operator companies being in those classrooms, working with administrators, helping them design and sustain the necessary changes that are that bring about the student achievement.
I mean, but it sounds like on the Griffin side, particularly, we're basically paying for one person to come in and do administrative stuff. Like where the difference has been made is in the resources from USIG and TISA and recruiting, like getting the teacher of the year to come to Griffin. You know, there were like nothing we're paying for an external operator recruits good teachers, right? That's just a separate thing. Like that's where the USIG and the other funds come in. Is that right?
I don't know that I'm answering your question properly, so I'm gonna try it this
That's
way.
fine.
Don't, no disrespect. So there's more to it than just working with the administrator. You are correct. Yes, last year you had the teacher of the year come. Last year was also the first year that you had TISA funds. That was a significant amount of money that we needed to bring in and recruit. If we hadn't gotten that from the state, we would not have necessarily, in my opinion, been able to attract those types of teachers. But one teacher or 4 teachers can't do all of the lift, because if they could, we'd been doing that. And so we have to look at everything that's available to us and what the external operator, first of all, let's talk about, we're here because this was the option available to us that was, for lack of a better phrase, the least intrusive.
Right.
It's a collaborative partnership between the district and this company, and it was one of the options. And so, yes, they are providing great support administratively, and UNISIG does help to a degree, but this is the next layer that the state says, here's what you got. Let us bring in some help and get you somebody. We got companies that can do this. They approve them after we do. And then if that helps, great. If not, we're moving to another level, and we don't want to hear that. So this is the best that makes the teachers feel at ease too. They really appreciate the support that they're getting through lead coaches and curriculum specialists coming in to provide that additional support. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. No, it didn't. And let me be clear on this. My quarrel on this was not with you. It's not. It's the gangsterism of it. You know, it's why not just provide these? Why not just provide adequate funding from the beginning and adequate support from the beginning? Because $840,000 in external operator money could buy a lot of Sarah's social workers, I suspect. You know, at least 8 or 9 of them. It's symptomatic of a much larger and corrupt model that I know you all have to work in. So I'm trying to think through what's the best way for me to be responsible while not being blackmailed by that model. So I appreciate it. You've been helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And I also want to say that the external operators are all doing coaching in classrooms, as well as observing instruction and how do they adjust instruction for the betterment of the children and provide professional development for the teachers as well. So and the good thing we have is it is a collaborative model that we're all in there together, and the principals are not receiving 2 and 3 different leads. They're getting one voice as we work through it together. So I wanted to add that. We have a question from Mr. Wilson.
Yes, thank you, Superintendent Byrd. as you all know, I was not in favor of the approach we took a few years ago with the external operator. However, I respect that decision and I'm fully on board with it once it was made. I, like all of the other board members, are very proud of the staff there and all that they've done. And I think it's terribly unfortunate that they were not able to demonstrate, the successes that they've had. And I just think that this approach is incredibly, incredibly harsh. It is so unfortunately uninformed. The reality is our failing schools are not a product of local school districts. They're a product of federal and state laws. And I would relish the opportunity to go to Tallahassee and have a chance to speak to a committee there or to speak to the folks there, because I've done the research, I've done the empirical research, and it's not a product of our local school districts. And it's so incredibly uninformed on their part to implement these harsh penalties on our school district and more importantly to our local schools. So I certainly don't want to see one of our schools closed, so I'll be supporting this. And I just wanted to go on record as having said that it's just a stunning lack of understanding of education, how it works. So I also have a comment about the deed that we're offering a quick claim deed on one of the schools. Can I talk about that now, or do you want me to wait?
Hold on one moment. As soon as I can get Miss Barnes off, and I believe Miss Usher is in there with you, Miss Barnes. So are there any more questions on this topic? And then I'll switch, because that is where I was going next. None? Okay. Thank you. If you and Miss Usher can switch. Mr. Wilson, thank you for the lead in. If there are no questions, I'm gonna go quickly, Mr. Wilson, on items 7, 8, and 9. If you have no questions, or we can come back. But I do know items 10, I asked Ms. Usher to be present regarding the George Jenkins lease, as well as the quick claim deed, which Mr. Wilson is referring to. So Ms. Usher, if you can actually do both 10, the George Jenkins, and if you can do the deed.
Certainly. The deed in 1995, the school board gave the 1919 building to the city of Lake Wales. There was a condition in that quitclaim deed that if by 2005 they don't fix it up and use it for a public purpose, it reverts. Now we're in 2020 and they're trying to sell the property now to Lake Wales Charter School. So the quitclaim deed is to release that reverter so that they're able to sell it.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. If you want to go ahead with your question, since we went to the deed first on that one.
Sure. Well, first of all, let me say thank you for this. I know there have been some contentious relationships with the Lake Wales Charter School system, and I think this is a great opportunity to partner with the community there, and just an appropriate thing to do in ensuring that we're providing the resources that all of our children and students need. But I do have one question. Now that we're issuing a quick claim deed, and I think this is probably for you, Mr. Bridges, what happens if someday they choose not to use that as a school? Can they sell it and put it in their general fund?
Okay, Wes, sorry, go ahead.
The answer to your question is, am I live?
Yes.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The reverter clause that was contained in the deed, in the quitclaim deed that we gave, not the quitclaim, the deed that we issued earlier, was designed to allow the building to come back to the district if it was no longer used for a public purpose. That is a cloud on the title in any effort to sell the building. The expressed intent of the city is to sell the building to Lake Wales Charter Schools for their use. One thing to keep in mind is that there was, given that this took place in 1995, or 25 years out, I don't think the district has any real expectation of the facility coming back at this point, and the city has expended significant funds in maintaining and improving the facility. If the district releases that, then the city is at liberty to sell Lake Wales Charter Schools. There would be no possibility of reverter at that time if it was no longer used for a school. That would go away. One One other question that has been raised is the possibility for review. It's likely that a judge would find that use as a charter school is in fact a public purpose. So yes, you would be relinquishing the right of reverter in the event the facility was no longer used for a public purpose. But it's been 25 years since the deed, and I don't think the district has any real expectation at this point.
So is the city actually selling it or just giving it to them? I mean, are they going to sell it to make a profit on it?
The city is,
Go ahead.
the city is selling it payable over 20 years at a cost of $575,000. But to your first question, if we release the reverter where it doesn't come back to us, even if they don't use it as a public purpose, they can do whatever they want. I think that's what Mr. Bridges was saying.
Right.
But my understanding is that the city is selling it to Lake Wales Charter School for middle school at $575,000.
So, I mean, currently it would have to be used for a public purpose, but once we offer this quitclaim deed, then it can be used for anything.
That is correct. The representation that was made to us is that it would be used by the Lake Wales Charter Schools. And it's specifically conditioned on the representation that the conveyance would be made to that end.
Do we know if Lake Wales Charter School System is willing to pay that for it? Do we have some idea that that's the case?
Our assumption is that is the case since it's been brought to us for release.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, the second item that Mrs. Bird asked me to address is the partial lease agreement release.
Just a moment, Angela. We have a question. That's okay. We have a question from Ms. Reynolds.
I will not be supporting this just because it concerns me that they'll be selling it and there will be no guarantee that they'll use it for public purposes. Lake Wales Charters could go and sell it and make a greater profit. I would support doing a new quitclaim deed directly with Lake Wales Charter Schools. I don't know if that's an option, or Wes, if you could elaborate on what that would look like. But it concerns me to release the quitclaim deed and allow another organization to make a profit on it, specifically when we're in a time of financial need. So while I understand that Lake Wales needs the space for their charter schools and for Bach North, and I would fully support transferring our quitclaim deed to be directly with Lake Wales Charter Schools, where if for any reason they were no longer to need it, or if they were to try and offload it, it would come back to the district to make sure that it stays in the public sphere. But I would not support reverting the quitclaim deed so that it can be sold.
We could potentially request that the city include in their transaction with Lake Wales Charter Schools a provision that should Lake Wales Charter Schools cease to use the building for a public purpose, that it would revert to the school district. We could request that, see what their response would be. I don't think there's a provision, or I don't think the situation would allow for an additional quitclaim deed to Lake Wales. The only thing we have left is a reverter. So that's the only interest we have.
Yeah, I think that's what I was saying, is letting it revert back to us and entering a new quitclaim deed with Lake Wales.
I'd be happy to request it and see what response we get.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Townsend?
That sounds like a reasonable request. I mean, let's see what they say. I mean, this sounds pretty similar to what we did with the Academy Prep building, the old John Cox or whatever it was building in Lakeland. So I have no problem with this concept, but I think Sarah's point's good. So I mean, I would support checking on that. Can I ask one question real quick again that I forgot to ask about the previous stuff on the external operators? What happened? What did they do after everything went to virtual? Were they around?
They were, but they suspended their contracts. But they were still working with the principal and administration virtually. Yes, they were.
Okay, so we didn't actually pay them for. We still don't know what's going to happen this year. Like, are they subject to?
So I would say that's the beauty of having a good partnership with the companies. One, it does have a clause in there, if there's no testing already, you hold back those funds. And two, we collaborated with them. If something happens, and then they suspend for a certain amount of months, and they suspend that their funding, and then they just work with the principals and the leadership team, and we streamline the funding down just for that, so we don't pay the full contract at that point.
Okay, thanks.
Ms. Mill, I think you were having a question on the Lake Wells, am I correct?
Yes, on the building. Do we know what the city's selling it to the charters district is for the investment they've made in it? I'm not familiar with this building at all.
Mrs. Miller, I'm not certain because we haven't analyzed the building to see what the cost would be to restore it. I don't know where the 575 came from, if that would be the cost to fix it up so that it can be used from a middle school. I am not certain where that money came from.
But you said they've maintained it, so they've done work to the building.
I understand, and Wes, please correct me, that it was being used for the Boys and Girls Club for a while. So I'm not certain how much they did, the amount of work they did to it.
Okay.
But if I may, Mrs. Bird, I would like to read the paragraph in the quitclaim deed. And it's really, I don't know if we have any option. It says, should grantee herein fail to develop or renovate the property described herein to be used for a public purpose by January 1st, 2005, or at any time prior thereto attempts to sell or convey said property or otherwise devote said property to a private use, then the property shall revert to grantor. I'm concerned the 2005. I don't know if this is just West just cleaning up the record, or if this is something that they really have to do, since that we're in 2020 now.
Well, I think that they complied with the provision in there, and they did in fact put it into use for a public purpose by that time.
Right.
So I don't believe that's an issue.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Fortney has a question.
Thank you, Superintendent Byrd. I actually tutored in that building, kids. So, you know, and I agree with Mr. Wilson about extending an olive branch. But I also know that McLaughlin needs a gym and we're in financial uproar. So, you know, I tend to agree with Ms. Reynolds. Let's see what we can do with that ourselves, if that is a possibility, Mr. Bridges.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I follow. To do what ourselves?
Sarah?
Ms. Fortney, are you there?
It appears that she's muted.
Okay. Once she comes back into the room, we'll see if we can figure it out. I believe what Ms. Reynolds was asking is that if they do not utilize it, just like LVIM, it reverts back to the district.
Right.
Yes.
That's what she was. And Ms. Fortney, is that what you're
Yes,
speaking
ma'am. I'm agreeing with Ms. Reynolds.
We'll make the request, see what response we get.
Mr. Bridges, one quick question. We have that on for the agenda tonight. I mean, for this afternoon. Do we need to pull that one off the agenda?
I know that they have a time issue, but
unless you can get
I can attempt to make the phone call in between, although it is now 12:15 and we're set for a 12:30 board meeting.
Yes, I believe the chair is going to move to 1 right now, so everyone will know the chair is moving the meeting to 1 because it is such short time right now. So that'll give you, excuse me, that'll give you some time, Mr. Bridges, to try to make a call.
That's right.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on this item? Ms. Fields?
I guess I'm a little bit confused, Wes. I was thinking that it was a $10 lease agreement when we originally entered the lease agreement with the city of Lake Wales in 1995. And I'm not understanding why Lake Wales would then in exchange sell it to the charter school district for $500,000+, unless of course it's what Ms. Miller was alluding to, that it's because of the investments that they made. So I would really want to find out more about that, and if ultimately we can do what Ms. Reynolds has suggested, to me that just would make much more sense.
I'll
And
certainly
I
ask.
know that we might be on a very short window of time, but I think that we need to do this right if we're going to do it at all.
I'll ask the question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Reynolds?
I just wanted to clarify, and Wes, you may be able to help with this, but they, for that $10 in the quit claim deed, they've been maintaining the building, but they also have been using the building for the past
Correct.
20
Correct.
years. So
Yeah, what my understanding is that the district conveyed it to them. They had a use for it. They have been maintaining it, keeping it up, improving it, using it all this time. They've had it for 25 years. The charter school, Lake Wells Charter Schools now wishes to enter into an agreement with the city to buy the building so they can use it as a school. And the city is amenable to that. And given the purchase price, I suspect there's not much in the way of profit built into that. The maintenance, upkeep, repairs, and insurance costs, I would suspect would easily surmount that amount. But I'll make the call to their city attorney and see if we can get a response.
okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that they haven't been paying rent or mortgage or anything.
No, we
They've
conveyed
been
it.
able to use it
we-
for free, which should
Yeah,
offset the cost.
yeah, it's their building. Yeah, we conveyed it to them.
Okay.
The only way that it would come back to us is if it ceased to be used for public purpose.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson?
So there are a number of pieces of this that are problematic from my perspective. They could theoretically allow or convey or allow the Lake Wells Charter School System to use that building under the current agreement. There is no need to sell it. In addition to that, the fact that they incurred some sort of maintenance costs over the years, in my opinion, is inconsequential. That was their cost of using the building. That they got a free building out of it. So they incurred maintenance costs. We all incur maintenance costs on a routine basis. So charging for that seems, that's between them and the charter school system, but I'm not sure that how that would come into play as far as we're concerned. Their timeline is of no consequence to me either. I mean, I respectfully say that we have responsibility to manage it in the best interest of our school district and working with in my opinion, with their charter school system. Now, if it requires $500,000 to bring it up to speed, and that's in effect what is being charged, that's another matter, but it doesn't seem like that's what I'm hearing. So I'm going to respectfully request this be pulled from the agenda until we get some more information. I want to make sure it goes to the Lake Wells Charter School System, and so it seems like we would have some additional assurances that would happen.
Thank you. Ms. Reynolds?
Okay. I just want to echo a little bit of what Lynn said. I think the most important thing to me is making sure that this building is able to be used for our kids in the future. And it scares me to think that they could eventually sell it, something that the district purchased at one point and then was given away for $10, which to me is essentially free. So I just want to make sure that at the end of the day, it can come back to be used for a public good. So I would agree with Lynn pulling it from the agenda tonight. If not, again, I won't be supporting it. But I do think, I know we're meeting on the 30th for the public hearing, that we could have an agenda item to do if we need to do something at that time, which would help a little bit with their timeline.
Thank you.
And probably with ours.
Thank you. Do I see a show of hands for a consensus to remove item 53 from the meeting tonight? Thank you. We will remove that item. Thank you. Ms. Usher, you want to briefly go over the Jenkins lease as well?
Yes, when the county abandoned, I think it was Gus Stewart property, just south of George Jenkins High School. It was a 22 feet by 281 foot property. And at that time, we were getting COPS financing for George Jenkins High School. So the property we had to do the lease. And at that time, it was held with the School Board Association. Then the second lease was the bank that financed it, so they were added to the second lease. In 2001, we sold that strip of property to the adjacent owner, and now the adjacent owner is trying to sell it, but we did not release the lease agreement, even though we don't own it, and we have paid off our cops. So this is just to release those two lease agreements. We don't even own the property, but it's still on the title.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, are there any additional questions on any of the information items? Seeing none, I'm going to turn the meeting now over to the chair.
Okay, good afternoon, board members. Our next item on the agenda is to review the school board agenda for tonight, this afternoon, I should say. So I'm going to go very quickly in the essence of time. Any questions from items 1 through item 10? Ms. Miller?
Sorry, I was trying to unmute. I think my question might have started at 11, and I was asked to email them because of time. They figured there would be a time constraint. Do you want me to run through them now? Because they're not answered.
Okay, I'm not sure what you're saying. This is on the agenda for this evening?
Yeah, this is on the regular agenda.
What number?
I think the first one is at 12. Do you want me to go ahead?
Well, okay, so let me go in the groups if you don't mind. So
Okay.
from items 1 through item 10, is there any questions? Let's try to go along. Okay, seeing none, items on the consent agenda, item 11 through item 49. On the
Yes.
consent agenda, would that be you, Ms. Miller?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead then, thank you.
Okay, some of these I didn't have numbered, but they should be pretty easily answered. Item number 12 with the bid recommendations.
Yes.
Have we negotiated these agreements? Because several are marked with the same terms and condition as the original bid. And who oversees that process?
That would be mine. That's Lynn Adams. They are all bid items.
So we made no changes. We're accepting the same from the last. I'm just curious about the process.
Yeah, that is correct.
Okay, number 16. I think there should be a public statement on Title II and how the 4 million grant is used during the board meeting. I mean, that's just my personal opinion. There's a lot of questions on Title II spending. If somebody wants to just give a brief, is that possible?
I have an email from Dr. Longa that let me send you, and you could read that right now. If I could do
Okay.
it.
And the next one is probably still you, Mike. We're hanging out.
That's why I came over.
Who's on the insurance committee, and do we bid out that group dental and term life? Because we've not had there's no changes recommended. I don't know the public knows that we've made good effort to look for better rates.
We have their bid items, and the superintendent's insurance committee is a large committee made up of AFSCME, PEA, and district admin. And we meet quarterly and we go over all those things, and they were recommended by the committee to the superintendent to be approved by the board.
That's
about
good
16. It's a very large group. It's great.
Yeah, that's good for the public to know that other people were in on that, especially the unions. Can someone discuss the new web filtering and the need for that and what the cost was for that?
That's not me.
Okay.
Good afternoon. So we are required, I did send some information, but we are required by law through SIPA and COPA for child protection to filter the internet. We have been using, several years ago, we were using iBoss as our filtering solution. That we found that wasn't adequately filtering and providing what we needed. And when we moved to a new firewall 2 years ago, we were using the Fortinet built-in firewall. and we were having some challenges with some of the reporting. And so we were in the process in February timeframe of looking at a new solution to provide better, more adequate filtering and reporting. And so we were already looking at Lightspeed. We were doing a pilot proof of concept, and then COVID hit, and we did not have a solution for sending a device home with filter. We did not have licensing in place because we were not doing that. And so we very quickly had to find a solution. Well, Lightspeed actually gave us 90 days free use of their system, set it up district-wide in about 3 days, so that we were very quickly able to turn around that, getting all of those devices configured to send home. We have been very, very happy with the not only the company, and they're working through the issues as we deploy 23,000 devices, really for free, because they did not charge us. So we decided to go ahead and move forward with a contract for them in the upcoming years, because it actually gave us the adequate filtering we needed and included the licensing to be able to send it home. If we had not done that, we would have paid a chunk of money through the Fortinet to purchase licensing for adding that filtering ability to take the device home. So that's why we went with that solution.
Thank you. That's all I have, Madam Chairwoman. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Ms. Miller. Okay, so next we come to our regular agenda. And on item 51, we will be voting tonight for our FSB Advocacy Committee. As everybody knows, that they request that each of our school boards provides a representative to that committee and an alternate. And we currently have Ms. Sarah Beth Reynolds is our representative, and I believe is it Ms. Miller is our alternate. So my question is, at this point, it is for a 2-year term coming up. And I wondered, what is the pleasure of the board? Ms. Reynolds?
Sorry, the raise hand and unmute button get me every time. If the board is willing, I would love to continue to serve. They're in the transition right now of, it used to be called the Legislative Committee, and it is now being called the Advocacy Committee. I know they sent a memo out last week, I believe, it may have been the week before, about how that transition is working. There's about 8 of us that have been on that steering committee, from it being solely legislative to being more about advocacy as a whole, not just to our legislators, but to the public, more so the public arm of public education, and how we're educating the public as well as our legislators about the benefits of some of the decisions that are made for us. So I would love to continue to serve in that transition, but I'll defer to the board.
Anybody have any comments? Well, if we have a volunteer, it's kind of hard to say no. So do I have a consensus with a raise of hands of those that would be for Ms. Sarah Beth Reynolds to continue for the next 2-year term as our representative to the FSBA Advocacy Committee? If you could just raise your hands. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think we're there. Okay, and then I would like to ask for someone to volunteer. I don't know if Ms. Miller would like to continue as the alternate to that committee.
I mean, I would be willing to serve as alternate. I haven't served a whole term. I kind of came in, I kind of fill in. Yeah. And I had an email from Palm Beach County to work on some equity issues on another committee, but it kind of aligns with that. So okay. It's up, I mean, I'm willing if someone else is interested, but yeah, I would like to continue that work.
Okay, if I could have a show, Ms. Fortney?
Yeah, I also was contacted about the equity committee for obvious reasons. And I also am going to be a part of that committee, and I'm hoping it won't be a problem with Ms. Miller on there. She did not mention that.
Yeah, we probably should ask that, Ms. Fortney, but I would definitely relinquish that role to you. So we can work that out in the sunshine and figure out if that will work.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm hearing that Ms. Miller has volunteered to continue for the next 2-year term. Is that correct? Okay, and will everyone by consensus just raise your hand if we're in consensus for Ms. Miller to be the alternate on the FSBA Advocacy Committee? Okay, and we'll be voting, of course, on that tonight. I just want to be able to present it in vote format. Is there any other comments, Miss Susan? No, I'm good. Okay. All right, our next item, is there any questions on 52 or 53? I think we already talked about those two here just a few minutes ago. So any questions on item 54, the IDEA Part B Federal Entitlement Grant? Okay, next we of course have our public hearing on our policy updates. Any questions regarding that? Okay, and then we'll have our superintendent's report, Mrs. Byrd. And I know we'll have an attorney's report with several items as well. I don't believe we have an auditor's report. And then of course we come to our school board member comments. Okay. Okay, so the next item on the agenda, we have about 20 minutes to the board meeting, if it's okay. Can I get a show of hands for us to move the board meeting to 1 o'clock at this point? 1 or 1:15 or whatever people want. I only need a few minutes.
Move it a little bit later.
Yes, sir.
I need to get something to eat
Okay.
before we start.
Okay, what time, Mr. Wilson?
Well, how much time do you think we'll need? Maybe start it at 1:30?
Sure, we can do, is that okay with everybody?
I just
1:15.
wanna,
Is that
I
gonna be
know
all
I
right for
have to leave
graduation?
my house by 2:45 at the latest to be able to get to graduation on time. I don't know
Okay.
about district staff, but
That's
All right.
okay.
What about a compromise for 1:15? Does that work?
It's fine with me.
Sarah Beth, would that work for you? Okay, Billy said yes. Lisa? Show of hands, 1:15 for the board meeting. Okay, let's make it 1:15 then. And in light of timing, the next item is the superintendent search update. I have secured 4 different firms that would be interested in presenting to us. So because of timing right now, if it's okay, I will work with Susan to prepare an email to give you the names, the information on each of those, and to try to schedule a work session in the first part of July for us to get together and talk about it and have them present to us. Is that okay with everyone? Okay, we'll get you a date. I'm thinking just off the top of my head, looking at the calendar, I was looking at July the 14th because it's a Tuesday, because our next board meeting is on the 28th. Would the 14th work? And we may just do a Zoom and have them Zoom in and present, that type of thing. Again, just it doesn't have to decide that today because I know we're short for time, but I'll have Miss Susan get with everybody and maybe present that date and a few others and see what works best for everyone because I know it's vacation time in July. Okay, after that, we have our board comments, and I'd simply like to request that we hold the board comments until the board meeting tonight so we can take a break. Yes, Miss Fields?
Ms. Cunningham, when we meet to discuss the search firms, are we also going to discuss whether or not there is an internal candidate for the superintendent's position?
Yes, of course.
Is it going to be discussed on the 14th?
Yes, ma'am, we can do that. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah, at this point, I wasn't going to do that at this time because I wanted to kind of have everybody hear from each of the 4 firms that are interested. And then we can go forward and discuss that as well. But that's a good point. You're absolutely right. That's a good point. Okay, so noted.
Okay, I just was thinking if we're going to have any viable internal candidate, then we don't need to be pursuing a search firm. But we
Correct.
can talk about that on the 14th, I guess.
Yes, ma'am. We'll
All
do
right.
that. We'll plan to do that. Thank you. Mr. Townsend?
Yeah, I mean, I would understand that actually identifying internal candidates would also be part of the mission of the search firm. It doesn't necessarily have to be external, right? I mean,
Correct.
so yeah. I mean, I fully intended that we would discuss that as part of the search firm's brief. Okay.
Sounds great. Thank you, Mr. Townsend. Ms. Reynolds?
Sorry, I hit the button, but somebody had already unmuted me. I was gonna echo what Kay said. I know Mr. Townsend's mentioned a couple times internal candidates. I'm not sure if he has one already in mind. If so, I think that might be helpful before we spend people's time doing presentations. Because if there is an internal candidate, it would be great to know before that. But if that's part of the search as well, then that's understandable.
All right, thank you, Ms. Reynolds. Okay, and is it okay if we just save our board comments until the board meeting so we can go ahead and adjourn the meeting? Everybody good with that? Anybody have anything pressing that they need to make a comment before we go? Ms. Miller?
I just have one quick question. It might be held over to the board meeting. June 30th. Are we going to talk about it at the board meeting? Like what that will look like?
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. I had a
Yes,
couple of questions and I'll hold them for time's sake.
That'd be great. Thank you so much. I'll actually be doing my board report on that upcoming meeting. So yes, ma'am.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Anybody else have anything we need to talk about before we adjourn? Okay, thank you for your time. And this work session for June 16th, 2020 is now adjourned.